You have been taught to fix everything: your thoughts, your emotions, your past, your pain, your habits, your body, even your personality. But if fixing everything was the path to peace, why do you still feel tired after every breakthrough? Why does one problem disappear only for another one to take its place? Why does your mind keep searching for what is wrong, even when nothing is falling apart? The truth is, you were never meant to live like a repair project. You were never meant to treat every feeling like an emergency and every flaw like a failure. Deep healing begins when you stop trying to fix everything and start accepting yourself, not because you have no work left to do, but because you finally understand that you are allowed to be loved before you are perfect. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will begin to loosen. The pressure to become someone else will grow quiet. The voice that keeps saying, "Not yet, not enough, not until you improve," will start to lose its power. And little by little, you will feel what it means to come home to yourself. This is not about giving up. This is about putting down the whip you have been using on your own soul. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something strange begins to happen when you spend too many years trying to improve yourself. You slowly stop seeing yourself as a human being and start seeing yourself as a problem to solve. Every emotion becomes evidence that something is wrong. Every mistake feels like proof that you still need fixing. Even your quiet moments become filled with pressure because your mind no longer knows how to simply exist without searching for flaws. And that is where this hidden exhaustion begins. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep cannot fix, a kind of heaviness that does not come from work, responsibilities, or lack of rest. It comes from carrying yourself like a broken project every single day. It comes from waking up each morning feeling like you must improve before you deserve peace. It comes from constantly monitoring your thoughts, correcting your personality, analyzing your emotions, and trying to become acceptable to yourself. Most people do not even realize they are doing this. They think they are simply being disciplined, self-aware, ambitious, or emotionally mature. But beneath all of that is often a quiet war against themselves. And wars, even silent ones, drain the soul. Many people spend years trapped inside this invisible cycle. They read more books, watch more videos, try more routines, chase more breakthroughs, hoping that one day they will finally arrive at a version of themselves that feels worthy of rest. But the finish line never stays still. As soon as one insecurity disappears, another one appears beside it. As soon as one habit improves, another flaw demands attention. The mind becomes like a machine programmed to search for defects, and eventually even healing becomes exhausting. You can see this in the way people talk to themselves when nobody is listening. One small mistake ruins their entire day. One awkward conversation becomes evidence that they are socially broken. One emotional reaction makes them believe they are failing at healing. They carry an invisible clipboard in their mind, constantly grading themselves, constantly measuring whether they are finally becoming good enough. But the human nervous system was never designed to live under endless self-surveillance. A person cannot feel peace while constantly treating themselves like an unfinished repair job. Even moments that should feel joyful become contaminated by self-analysis. Someone compliments you, but instead of receiving it, your mind immediately searches for reasons it cannot be true. You accomplish something important, but instead of feeling proud, your thoughts rush toward the next thing you still need to improve. You rest for a moment, then guilt whispers that you should be doing more. Over time, this creates a life where nothing is ever enough. And the dangerous part is that society often rewards this behavior. People praise relentless self-improvement. They admire those who are always pushing harder, fixing themselves, optimizing every part of their personality. But very few people stop to ask an important question. What happens when your entire identity becomes built around self-correction? You begin to lose the ability to simply be. You stop sitting with your emotions naturally because every feeling immediately becomes something to solve. Sadness becomes a project. Anxiety becomes a failure. Anger becomes evidence of emotional immaturity. Even exhaustion becomes another thing you criticize yourself for. And slowly, without realizing it, you become emotionally homeless inside your own mind. There are people who have spent so many years trying to improve themselves that they no longer know how to relax around themselves. Silence feels uncomfortable because the brain immediately starts scanning for what still needs fixing. Free time feels dangerous because unresolved thoughts rise to the surface. Rest feels undeserved because somewhere deep inside they believe peace must be earned. That belief alone destroys countless people quietly. The idea that you must become better before you deserve gentleness creates a life filled with invisible pressure. You become terrified of your own imperfections because you think flaws make you unlovable. So you work endlessly to correct them. You rehearse conversations before they happen. You overthink every interaction afterward. You analyze your reactions. You compare yourself constantly. You monitor your productivity. You question your worth. And eventually, your inner world becomes a courtroom where you are always the defendant. What makes this even harder is that many people developed this habit very early in life. Some grew up in environments where love felt conditional. Maybe they were praised only when they succeeded. Maybe mistakes were met with criticism instead of understanding. Maybe emotions were ignored, mocked, or punished. So the child learned something dangerous. If I can perfect myself, maybe I will finally feel safe. But children carry those survival strategies into adulthood. That is why some adults become obsessed with self-improvement, not because they truly hate growth, but because they secretly fear rejection. Their constant fixing is not always about becoming better. Sometimes it is about avoiding abandonment, shame, criticism, or emotional pain. Perfection becomes protection. And when a person spends years living this way, they stop realizing how exhausted they truly are, because the pressure becomes normal. They wake up already mentally preparing to manage themselves. They carry tension in their body without noticing it. Their shoulders stay tight. Their jaw clenches. Their thoughts race endlessly. Even moments of stillness feel restless because the nervous system has forgotten how to feel safe without constant control. This is why some people feel strangely empty even after achieving everything they once believed would heal them. They finally become more attractive, more productive, more disciplined, more successful, more emotionally aware, and yet the relief never fully arrives. The anxiety simply changes shape, because the deeper problem was never really the flaws they were trying to fix. The deeper problem was the belief that they were unacceptable as they were. No amount of improvement can heal self-rejection if the rejection itself remains untouched. That realization changes everything, because there comes a moment when a person begins to understand that they have spent their whole life approaching themselves with the energy of a mechanic instead of the energy of compassion. Every wound became something to repair quickly instead of something to listen to gently. Every insecurity became an enemy instead of a frightened part asking for care. And this creates a tragic relationship with yourself. You begin treating your inner world like a machine instead of a human experience. You forget that emotions are not mathematical problems. You forget that healing is not a straight line. You forget that being imperfect is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that you are alive. Some people are so addicted to fixing themselves that they panic whenever they are not improving. They do not know how to sit still without feeling guilty. They cannot enjoy progress because their attention immediately jumps toward what is still wrong. Their mind becomes trapped in a permanent state of self-evaluation, and the body pays the price for that mental pressure. Chronic self-criticism keeps the nervous system activated. The brain stays alert, as if danger is always nearby. Cortisol rises. Rest becomes harder. Sleep becomes lighter. Joy becomes more distant. The body starts carrying emotional exhaustion physically. Fatigue appears even after resting. Motivation disappears. Small tasks feel overwhelming. But most people never connect this exhaustion to the way they treat themselves internally. They think they are simply lazy, weak, undisciplined, or broken. So they respond the only way they know how, by trying even harder to fix themselves. And the cycle continues. One of the saddest parts of this pattern is how invisible it can become. A person may look functional from the outside while privately living under enormous emotional pressure. They smile, they work, they achieve things, they appear composed, but internally they are exhausted from constantly carrying the burden of self-repair. Even their self-care sometimes becomes another performance. Meditation becomes another task to master perfectly. Journaling becomes another opportunity to analyze flaws. Therapy becomes another place to prove they are healing correctly. Rest becomes scheduled productivity. Nothing feels natural anymore because everything becomes part of the project of becoming acceptable. This is why deep healing often begins with something surprisingly simple but terrifying. Stopping. Stopping the endless monitoring. Stopping the constant fixing. Stopping the war against every imperfect thought and feeling. Not because growth is bad, but because obsession with fixing yourself can quietly destroy your ability to love yourself. There is a huge difference between healthy growth and emotional self-rejection disguised as growth. Healthy growth says, I want to care for myself. Self-rejection says, I must repair myself before I deserve peace. Those two energies create completely different lives. One creates gentleness, the other creates exhaustion, and many people never learn the difference. They believe kindness toward themselves will make them lazy. They fear acceptance means giving up. They think self-compassion will remove ambition, but the truth is often the opposite. People grow best in environments of safety, not environments of constant punishment. Even plants do not bloom faster because you scream at them. Human beings are no different. A nervous system constantly attacked by shame cannot fully heal. A mind constantly criticized cannot fully rest. A person constantly treated like a project cannot fully feel alive. And maybe this is why so many people secretly feel disconnected from themselves. They have spent so many years trying to become better that they never learned how to simply sit beside themselves with patience. Not every flaw needs immediate correction. Not every emotion needs solving. Not every uncomfortable thought means something is wrong with you. Sometimes healing begins the moment you stop reacting to yourself with panic. There is deep wisdom in learning how to witness your own humanity without immediately trying to edit it. To feel sadness without labeling yourself weak. To make mistakes without turning them into identity statements. To feel lost without assuming you are failing at life. Because the truth is, human beings were never meant to operate with robotic perfection. You are allowed to be complicated. You are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to have contradictions inside you. And strangely enough, the more a person learns to accept this, the lighter they begin to feel. Not because their problems disappear overnight, but because the war inside them begins to quiet down. That internal war consumes enormous energy. Constant self-monitoring drains attention from life itself. You stop experiencing moments fully because your mind is too busy evaluating you within them. You stop hearing conversations clearly because you are busy wondering how you are being perceived. You stop enjoying simple pleasures because guilt whispers that you should be improving instead. This is why acceptance feels so unfamiliar at first. Many people have spent their whole lives believing pressure is what keeps them valuable. Without self-criticism, they fear they will collapse. Without constant fixing, they fear they will become stagnant. So when they first try to treat themselves gently, it almost feels wrong. The nervous system does not immediately trust peace when it has been trained by pressure for years. But slowly, something begins changing. You start noticing how much energy you wasted fighting yourself. You realize how often your suffering came not from the emotion itself, but from your resistance to it. You see how many years were spent trying to earn a level of worthiness that was never supposed to be earned in the first place. And grief often appears here. Grief for the younger version of yourself who thought they had to become perfect to deserve love. Grief for the years spent at war with your own mind. Grief for how harshly you spoke to yourself while trying to survive. But there is also relief, because for the first time you begin understanding that healing may not require becoming someone else entirely. Maybe healing is learning how to stop abandoning yourself every time you become imperfect. That changes everything. Because when a person no longer treats themselves like a broken project, they finally create room for something they may have never fully experienced before: inner safety. And inner safety changes the way you breathe, think, sleep, speak, and exist in the world. You stop living as if your worth is constantly on trial. You stop seeing every flaw as an emergency. You stop chasing impossible. Perfection as the price for peace. And instead of spending your life trying to fix yourself into lovability, you slowly begin learning how to meet yourself with the kind of understanding you were always searching for from everyone else. That is where the hidden exhaustion finally begins to loosen. Not through more pressure, not through becoming flawless, but through finally realizing that you were never meant to carry yourself like a problem that needed solving every second of your life. And slowly, after carrying yourself like a problem for so many years, another painful truth begins to reveal itself. The exhaustion was not only coming from how hard you were trying to heal, it was also coming from the quiet belief hiding underneath all that self-improvement. The belief that who you are right now is still not enough. That is where self-improvement quietly turns into self-rejection. There is a kind of sadness that hides behind endless self-improvement. Most people never notice it at first because it often looks responsible, disciplined, ambitious, and even admirable from the outside. People praise you for working on yourself. They applaud your growth. They call you self-aware. But deep underneath all of that effort, there can sometimes be a painful message repeating inside the mind every single day. Who I am right now is unacceptable. And when self-improvement is built on that belief, it stops being healing. It becomes self-rejection wearing the mask of growth. At first, it feels innocent. You simply want to become better, more confident, more productive, more emotionally intelligent, more disciplined, more attractive, more healed, more successful. There is nothing wrong with wanting growth. Human beings naturally evolve. The problem begins when improvement stops coming from self-respect and starts coming from self-disgust. That changes everything, because now every habit carries emotional pressure behind it. Every goal becomes tied to your worth. Every mistake feels personal. Every weakness feels dangerous. And your life slowly becomes centered around escaping yourself instead of understanding yourself. You begin waking up each day feeling like your current version is only a temporary inconvenience on the way to becoming someone finally lovable. That is a heartbreaking way to live. Many people do not realize how deeply this mindset shapes their emotional world. They think they are motivated by ambition, but often they are being driven by fear. Fear of being ordinary, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of not being enough. Fear that if they stop improving for even a moment, they will lose value. And fear is a terrible foundation for peace. This is why so many people become trapped in endless self-help cycles without ever feeling emotionally safe. They keep consuming advice, routines, books, videos, podcasts, techniques, hoping the next breakthrough will finally make them feel whole. But instead of feeling freer, they become more hyper-aware of everything still wrong with them. The more they learn about healing, the more flawed they begin to feel. They notice every insecure thought, every emotional trigger, every unhealthy pattern, every weakness in communication, every moment of anxiety, every bad habit, every emotional wound. Their self-awareness becomes so intense that they lose the ability to simply exist naturally. And eventually, life starts feeling like a permanent self-improvement assignment. Even moments that should feel peaceful become contaminated by pressure. You cannot rest, because there is always another version of yourself you think you should become. You cannot enjoy progress because your attention immediately moves toward the next flaw. You cannot celebrate how far you have come because your mind only notices how far you still have to go. This creates a strange emotional emptiness. No achievement feels satisfying for long because your worth keeps moving further away from you. You become like a person running toward the horizon. No matter how hard you chase it, it never arrives. And this is where many people quietly burn out emotionally. Because constant self-improvement sounds empowering until your nervous system no longer knows how to feel safe without pressure. Your brain becomes addicted to fixing. Your identity becomes built around becoming better, and without realizing it, you begin relating to yourself with permanent disappointment. There are people who genuinely do not know how to look at themselves without mentally listing what still needs improvement. They struggle to receive compliments because internally they still feel unfinished. They struggle to feel lovable because they keep treating love like a reward for future perfection. They struggle to relax because resting feels irresponsible when there is still so much wrong with them. But human beings cannot thrive under endless internal criticism. A mind constantly exposed to self-rejection becomes emotionally exhausted. Even if nobody else is attacking you, your own thoughts create an environment of pressure that the nervous system never escapes from. This is why some people feel tired all the time, even when they are doing everything right. Their body is carrying the weight of an internal relationship built entirely around correction. And correction without compassion becomes cruelty. Many people learned this pattern very young. They were taught directly or indirectly that their value depended on performance. Maybe they were praised only when they succeeded. Maybe mistakes brought shame. Maybe vulnerability was treated like weakness. Maybe emotions were dismissed unless they were convenient. So they adapted. They became high achievers, perfectionists, caretakers, overthinkers, people pleasers, constant improvers. But underneath all those identities was often a frightened person trying to secure love through self-modification. This is why self-improvement can become addictive. Not because growth itself is harmful, but because improving yourself temporarily creates the illusion that you are moving closer to worthiness. Every new routine feels like hope. Every breakthrough feels like relief. Every moment of productivity briefly quiets the fear that you are failing at being enough. But the relief never lasts long, because the deeper wound was never truly about your habits, appearance, productivity, or emotional intelligence. The deeper wound was the belief that you had to earn your right to feel acceptable at all, and no amount of improvement can satisfy a wound rooted in conditional worth. This is why some people secretly panic when they are not actively improving themselves. Without goals, routines, or constant progress, they suddenly feel exposed. Stillness forces them to face the uncomfortable fear they have been outrunning for years. If I stop improving, what value do I actually have? That question terrifies many people, because they have spent so long building their identity around becoming better that they never learned how to simply exist without trying to upgrade themselves. Even hobbies become self-improvement projects. Exercise becomes punishment. Healing becomes competition. Productivity becomes morality. Rest becomes guilt. Relationships become performances. Nothing feels free anymore because everything becomes tied to proving worth. This is one of the loneliest emotional experiences a person can live through. From the outside, people may admire your discipline and growth, but internally you feel trapped inside endless self-monitoring. Your mind becomes a room where somebody is always criticizing you quietly. Even when nobody else is judging you, you judge yourself. Even when nobody else expects perfection, you expect it from yourself. Even when life is calm, your mind keeps searching for ways to improve because stopping feels dangerous. And eventually, you stop knowing who you are underneath all the self-optimization. This is why many people reach a point where they suddenly feel emotionally numb despite years of self-work. They have spent so much time trying to improve themselves that they lost connection with the simple experience of being human. Not every emotion needs correction. Not every flaw requires elimination. Not every insecurity makes you broken. Some parts of healing are not about becoming different. Some parts are about learning how to stop abandoning yourself whenever you become imperfect. That shift changes everything, because healthy growth sounds very different internally than self-rejection disguised as growth. Healthy growth says, I care about myself enough to grow. Self-rejection says, I must grow because who I am now is not acceptable. Those may sound similar on the surface, but emotionally they create completely different lives. One creates gentleness, the other creates chronic shame, and shame is exhausting. Shame convinces you that love must always be earned. It teaches you to monitor yourself constantly. It turns your own humanity into evidence against you. Instead of seeing flaws as normal parts of being alive, you start seeing them as personal failures that must be corrected quickly. You stop speaking to yourself like a person. You speak to yourself like a disappointed manager reviewing poor performance. And eventually, your inner world loses warmth. This is why so many people become disconnected from joy during intense self-improvement phases. They become so focused on fixing themselves that they stop fully living. They cannot enjoy ordinary moments because their mind is always occupied with becoming better. They eat while listening to productivity advice. They exercise while criticizing their body. They journal while analyzing flaws. They meditate while secretly trying to eliminate emotions. Even healing becomes another impossible standard to meet. And when they cannot maintain perfection consistently, they feel like failures all over again. That emotional cycle becomes brutal. Push harder, improve more, feel temporary relief, notice new flaws, feel inadequate again, push harder again, round and round, until one day the body begins resisting. Burnout appears, motivation collapses, anxiety increases, joy disappears. And many people become confused because they thought self-improvement was supposed to make them happier. But growth without self-acceptance eventually becomes emotional self-erasure. You begin trying to edit yourself into someone easier to love. Less emotional, less sensitive, less anxious, less flawed, less needy, less complicated. But in the process, you slowly lose connection with your authentic self. And authenticity cannot survive constant self-rejection. Human beings need room to exist imperfectly. They need room to breathe without constantly earning permission to feel worthy. They need room to make mistakes without collapsing into shame afterward. A nervous system cannot fully heal in an environment where love is always conditional upon improvement. That includes the love you give yourself. This is why acceptance becomes such a powerful turning point in healing. Not because growth suddenly stops mattering, but because your relationship with growth changes completely. You no longer improve yourself because you hate yourself. You improve yourself because you care about yourself. That emotional difference changes how the entire process feels internally. Growth stops feeling like punishment. Rest stops feeling illegal. Mistakes stop feeling catastrophic. You stop panicking every time you fall short of perfection. And perhaps most importantly, you stop treating your current self like an obstacle standing in the way of your future worth. Because the truth is, there will never be a perfect version of you that finally earns permanent peace. Human beings are living, changing, emotional creatures. There will always be flaws. There will always be fears. There will always be moments of insecurity and uncertainty. The goal was never perfection. The goal was learning how to stay connected to yourself, even when you are imperfect. That is real healing. And strangely enough, when people finally stop trying to force themselves into worthiness, they often begin growing in healthier ways naturally. Not because they are driven by shame anymore, but because safety creates space for real transformation. A person treated with compassion changes differently than a person treated with constant criticism, even internally. Think about how differently you behave around someone who makes you feel emotionally safe versus someone who constantly judges you. Around safety, you relax, you open up, you become honest, you grow naturally. The same thing happens inside your own mind. When you stop attacking yourself constantly, your nervous system finally begins unclenching. Your thoughts slow down, your body softens, you stop living in survival mode emotionally. And from that calmer place, healthier growth becomes possible. Not frantic growth, not fear-driven growth, not shame-fueled growth, but grounded, human growth, the kind rooted in understanding instead of punishment. Many people spend years trying to motivate themselves through harshness because they think self-compassion will make them weak. But constant self-criticism does not create sustainable healing. It creates emotional exhaustion. Fear may force temporary action, but it cannot create inner peace. Eventually, every person reaches a point where they must decide whether they want a life built on endless self-correction or a life built on deeper self-understanding. Because there is a difference between becoming your best self and spending your life trying to escape yourself. One creates wholeness, the other creates quiet despair. And perhaps the saddest part is how normalized self-rejection has become in modern culture. People bond over self-criticism, they laugh about burnout, they glorify overworking, they turn healing into performance, they compete over who is improving themselves the most. But very few people ask a simpler question: what if your value was never waiting at the end of your self-improvement journey? What if your worth was already present long before you became more disciplined, more healed, more attractive, more productive, or more emotionally perfect? That realization feels almost uncomfortable at first. Because if your worth already exists, then maybe you can finally stop carrying yourself like a constant disappointment. Maybe you can stop waking up every day at war with your own humanity. Maybe you can stop measuring your right to rest by your level of productivity. Maybe you can stop treating your flaws like proof that you are failing at life. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, you can begin approaching yourself with something softer than pressure, something softer than perfection, something softer than endless correction, understanding. Because real healing does not begin when you finally become flawless. It begins the moment you stop believing that being imperfect makes you unworthy of love. And once you begin to see how constant self-improvement can quietly become self-rejection, another deeper pattern starts to appear. It is not only that you keep trying to become better, it is that you have learned to inspect yourself as if your whole life depends on finding what is wrong before anyone else does. You do not simply live through a moment, you review it. You do not simply feel an emotion, you question it. You do not simply make a mistake, you turn it over in your mind like evidence in a case against yourself. There is a strange kind of peace that begins when you finally stop auditing your every flaw. Something soft returns to you when you stop treating your own mind like a courtroom. At first, it may feel unfamiliar, almost suspicious, because you are used to watching yourself so closely. You are used to checking your words after every conversation, checking your mood after every quiet day, checking your face in every mirror, checking your progress against some invisible standard you never agreed to but somehow obeyed for years. You may not even call it self-criticism anymore. You may call it being aware, being careful, being responsible, being honest with yourself. But if honesty never comes with kindness, it slowly becomes punishment. There are people who can spend an entire day doing well and still go to bed thinking about the one sentence they said awkwardly. They can receive love from 10 people and still believe the one person who seemed distant is proof that they are not enough. They can handle many things with strength, patience, and grace, but one small weakness becomes the only thing their mind wants to study. It is like carrying a magnifying glass over your own soul, not to admire what is beautiful, but to locate what still needs correction. And after a while, that kind of inner inspection becomes exhausting. You start living as if there is always a hidden mistake waiting to be discovered. You walk into rooms already scanning yourself. Am I too quiet? Am I talking too much? Did I look strange? Did I sound needy? Did I seem boring? Did I laugh too loudly? Did I share too much? Did I not share enough? And by the time the moment is over, you were barely inside it. You were too busy monitoring yourself to actually experience your own life. This is what happens when self-awareness loses its warmth. Real self-awareness helps you understand yourself. Harsh self-auditing makes you afraid of yourself. Real self-awareness says, "Let me notice this with patience." Harsh self-auditing says, "Let me find what is wrong before it ruins everything." One brings clarity, the other brings tension. One helps you grow, the other makes you feel watched from the inside. And no person feels peaceful while being watched all the time. The mind was not created to live under constant surveillance. Your heart was not created to be reviewed like a failed assignment. Your personality was not created to be inspected for defects every morning and every night. But many people do this so automatically that they no longer recognize it as violence against themselves. They think they are simply trying to be better, but beneath the surface, they are living with an inner critic that never clocks out. It follows them into relationships. It follows them into rest. It follows them into prayer, silence, sleep, work, creativity, and joy. Even when life gives them a beautiful moment, the critic stands nearby whispering, "Do not relax too much. There is still something wrong with you." That whisper steals more peace than most people realize, because peace does not only disappear when life becomes difficult. Sometimes peace disappears because you do not allow yourself to be unexamined. You cannot let a day simply be a day. You turn it into a report card. You cannot let sadness simply pass through you. You turn it into a diagnosis of your emotional failure. You cannot let tiredness simply mean you need rest. You turn it into proof that you are weak, lazy, unmotivated, or falling behind. And slowly, ordinary human experiences become evidence against you. This is why stopping the audit feels so powerful. Not because you suddenly become blind to your flaws, but because you stop treating every flaw like a threat to your worth. You begin to understand that noticing something about yourself does not mean you have to attack it. Seeing a weakness does not mean you must shame yourself into changing it immediately. Being imperfect does not mean you are in danger. That truth may sound simple, but for someone who has spent years judging themselves, it can feel like fresh air entering a locked room. Many people were trained to believe that if they stop criticizing themselves, they will stop growing. They fear that gentleness will make them careless. They think the inner critic is the only thing keeping them disciplined. So they continue listening to that harsh voice because it feels familiar, even when it hurts them. But here is the quiet truth. Fear can force movement, but it cannot create peace. Shame can push you for a while, but it cannot build a safe home inside you. You may get things done through self-criticism, yes. You may achieve, perform, improve, and appear strong. But deep inside, you will still feel like someone is chasing you. And what kind of life is that? Always running from the fear of being exposed as not enough. The peace that begins when you stop auditing your flaws is not lazy peace. It is not careless peace. It is the peace of finally realizing that you do not need to be under attack in order to become better. You do not need to hate yourself into healing. You do not need to monitor every corner of your personality as if one uncorrected part of you will destroy your life. Sometimes the most healing thing you can do is let yourself have an imperfect moment without turning it into a full investigation. You said something awkward. Let it pass. You felt jealous. Let it teach you without humiliating you. You were tired and did not perform perfectly. Let your body be human. You needed reassurance. Let that need exist without calling yourself weak. You had a difficult thought. Let it move through the mind without building your identity around it. This does not mean you ignore patterns that hurt you or others. It means you stop turning every small imperfection into a personal emergency. There is a difference between responsibility and self-punishment. Responsibility says, I can learn from this. Self-punishment says, this proves something is wrong with me. Responsibility keeps you grounded. Self-punishment keeps you ashamed, and shame does not make the lesson clearer. It only makes the heart heavier. Some people cannot feel peace because they are addicted to self-review. After every interaction, they replay what happened. After every decision, they wonder if they chose wrong. After every emotional moment, they ask whether they handled it perfectly. Their mind becomes a private review board that never stops meeting. And because the mind can always find something to question, they never feel finished. They never feel released. But life is not meant to be lived as a constant performance review. You are allowed to leave some conversations behind without dissecting them. You are allowed to let some days be ordinary. You are allowed to make a small mistake without making it the center of your identity. You are allowed to be seen in an imperfect state and not spend the next 5 hours mentally apologizing for existing. This is where peace begins. It begins when you stop believing that every flaw needs a punishment attached to it. It begins when you allow yourself to be a person, not a polished image. It begins when you understand that growth does not require constant suspicion toward yourself. In fact, too much suspicion can make real growth harder because you become afraid of looking honestly at anything. You cannot heal what you are too ashamed to touch. And this is one of the hidden problems with harsh self-auditing. It does not always make you more honest. Sometimes it makes you more defensive. When every flaw becomes a reason to hate yourself, your mind begins protecting you from seeing your flaws clearly. You either deny them completely or you drown in them. Neither path brings peace. Gentleness creates the safety needed for truth. When you know that noticing a weakness will not lead to self-abandonment, you can look at it more calmly. You can say, yes, I was impatient there, without collapsing into shame. You can say, yes, I still carry fear here, without calling yourself broken. You can say, yes, this part of me needs care, without turning it into a character sentence. That is maturity, not perfection, but the ability to see yourself clearly without cruelty. There is a quiet strength in that. Many people confuse harshness with honesty because they grew up around people who only corrected through criticism. They learned that love points out what is wrong before it notices what is good. They learned that mistakes should be met with embarrassment. They learned that being better means being less messy, less emotional, less difficult, less needy, less visible. So now, even in adulthood, they treat themselves with the same tone they once feared from others. Their inner voice is not really their own, it is an echo. Maybe it sounds like a parent who was never satisfied. Maybe it sounds like a teacher who embarrassed them. Maybe it sounds like a former partner who made them feel small. Maybe it sounds like a culture that taught them to be productive, attractive, calm, successful, and unbothered at all times. Over time, that voice becomes so familiar that they mistake it for truth. But not every voice in your mind deserves authority. Some voices are just old pain repeating itself. And part of deep healing is learning to ask, who taught me to speak to myself this way? That question can open a door, because when you realize your self-auditing was learned, you also realize it can be softened. You were not born hating every flaw. You were not born ashamed of needing time, care, patience, comfort, or understanding. You learned to treat your imperfections as dangerous because somewhere along the way, imperfection may have cost you love, approval, attention, safety, or belonging. So of course your mind became watchful. Of course you started checking yourself. Of course you learned to correct quickly before others could criticize. Of course you became your own inspector. At one time that may have protected you, but what protects you in one season can imprison you in another. A habit that once helped you survive rejection may now be blocking you from receiving peace. The same self-monitoring that once kept you from being embarrassed may now be keeping you from feeling free. There comes a point when you must ask whether the life you are protecting yourself from is still the life you are living. Maybe you are no longer in the same home. Maybe you are no longer around the same people. Maybe the danger has passed, but your nervous system is still behaving as if judgment is always nearby. So you audit yourself before anyone else can. You criticize yourself before anyone else does. You try to perfect yourself before anyone has a chance to reject you. But this kind of protection comes at a cost. It makes intimacy harder because you never fully show up. It makes rest harder because you always feel behind. It makes joy harder because joy requires surrender, and surrender feels unsafe when you are used to monitoring everything. It makes creativity harder because creativity needs room for mistakes. It makes healing harder because healing needs patience. So the peace you are looking for may not begin with fixing another flaw. It may begin with retiring from the role of your own full-time critic. That does not mean you become unaware. It means you become kinder in your awareness. It means when you notice something imperfect, you do not immediately tighten around it. You breathe, you listen, you ask what that part of you needs. You respond instead of attacking. This is how acceptance becomes practical. Acceptance is not pretending you have no flaws. Acceptance is refusing to use your flaws as weapons against yourself. Acceptance is the choice to stop making your humanity feel like a crime. It is the moment you say, I can see this part of me, and I do not need to hate myself for it. That one sentence can change the atmosphere inside your mind, because when the inner atmosphere softens, the body feels it. The shoulders drop, the breath deepens, the face relaxes, the stomach unclenches. You stop moving through the day like someone waiting to be corrected. You begin to feel less like a project and more like a person. And slowly, peace becomes possible. Not dramatic peace. Not the kind of peace where every problem disappears and every thought becomes beautiful. But a quieter peace. The kind that comes when you no longer turn every flaw into a fire alarm. The kind that comes when you can say, I am still learning, without hearing, I am failing. The kind that comes when one bad moment no longer defines your whole day. This peace may arrive slowly. At first, you may still catch yourself auditing. You may still replay conversations. You may still scan your face, your tone, your choices, your progress, your emotions. But now you can notice the auditing without obeying it. You can gently interrupt the old pattern. You can say, I do not need to review myself tonight. I am allowed to rest. That may feel small, but it is powerful, because every time you refuse to put, Yourself on trial, you teach your nervous system that safety is possible. Every time you let a flaw exist without punishment, you weaken the old belief that imperfection equals danger. Every time you speak to yourself with patience, you rebuild trust with yourself, and self-trust is one of the deepest forms of peace. When you trust yourself, you do not need to monitor every breath. You do not need to predict every mistake. You do not need to control every reaction before it happens. You know that even if you stumble, you will not abandon yourself. Even if you feel embarrassed, you will not destroy yourself with shame. Even if you disappoint someone, you will not lose all sense of worth. That is freedom. To live knowing that you are allowed to be human without becoming your own enemy. Many people do not realize how much energy returns when they stop auditing themselves. Mental space opens. You become more present in conversations. You laugh more freely. You make decisions with less fear. You rest without feeling like you must earn it through suffering first. You begin noticing beauty again because your attention is no longer trapped in constant self-evaluation. And perhaps most importantly, you begin relating to other people differently. When you stop judging yourself so harshly, you often become less harsh with others too. You stop needing everyone to be perfect because you are no longer demanding perfection from yourself. You become more patient with human messiness. You listen better. You forgive more wisely. You stop seeing every mistake as a threat. This is the quiet ripple effect of inner peace. A person who is not constantly attacking themselves has less need to attack life. But this does not happen through force. You cannot bully yourself into gentleness. You cannot criticize yourself into peace. You cannot audit your way into self-acceptance. At some point, you must lay down the clipboard. You must stop treating your soul like something that needs daily inspection. You must let some things be unfinished without turning them into emergencies. You must let some emotions pass without giving them a full courtroom trial. You must let some flaws remain visible while you learn to love yourself anyway. Because the goal of deep healing is not to become a person without flaws. That person does not exist. The goal is to become someone who no longer needs to turn against themselves every time a flaw appears. And when that begins to happen, life starts feeling different in quiet ways. You wake up and do not immediately search for what is wrong. You have a conversation and do not spend the whole evening punishing yourself for one imperfect sentence. You make a choice and allow it to be enough. You feel sadness and do not accuse yourself of going backward. You rest and do not treat rest like evidence of weakness. This is what peace looks like in real life. Not perfection, not endless calm, not total confidence every hour of the day, but a softer relationship with your own imperfection, a life where you can grow without hating the version of yourself that is still growing, a mind where your flaws are not treated like crimes, a heart where your humanity is finally allowed to breathe. And maybe that is the peace you were searching for all along. Not the peace of having nothing left to improve, but the peace of no longer believing that improvement is the price of being worthy. And once you stop putting your every flaw on trial, another realization slowly rises to the surface. For years, you may have believed healing meant becoming a completely different person, a calmer person, a stronger person, a more confident person, someone untouched by fear, sadness, insecurity, sensitivity, or pain. But somewhere along the way, healing stopped feeling like coming home to yourself and started feeling like escaping yourself entirely. That confusion quietly breaks many people from the inside. There is a painful loneliness in believing that the healed version of you must look nothing like the current one. It creates the feeling that your real self is somehow standing in the way of your peace. So every day becomes another attempt to outgrow your emotions, erase your flaws, silence your sensitivity, and rebuild your personality into something easier to admire. But healing was never supposed to erase you. Somewhere deep inside, many people carry a secret fantasy that one day they will finally wake up as someone completely different. The anxious version of them will disappear. The insecure version will vanish. The emotional version will become calm. The sensitive version will become strong. The overthinking version will become effortless. They imagine healing as a total transformation into a person untouched by struggle, and because of this, they spend years trying to abandon parts of themselves instead of understanding them. This is one of the most exhausting misunderstandings about healing. People think healing means removing every uncomfortable part of who they are. They think becoming emotionally healthy means never feeling fear again, never crying unexpectedly, never doubting themselves, never getting triggered, never feeling awkward, never struggling internally. But human beings are not machines that graduate into emotional perfection. Healing does not remove your humanity. It changes your relationship with it. That difference matters deeply, because when you confuse healing with becoming someone else, you begin rejecting parts of yourself that actually need compassion, not exile. You stop listening to your emotions because you are too busy trying to outgrow them. You stop understanding your sensitivity because you are trying to become tougher. You stop honoring your needs because you are trying to appear stronger. And slowly, you become emotionally disconnected from yourself. There are people who have worked so hard to become better that they no longer know what feels natural anymore. Every emotion becomes filtered through the question, should I still be feeling this if I were truly healed? Every difficult day becomes evidence that they are failing at healing. Every insecurity feels like proof they are still broken. But healing is not the absence of struggle. Healing is the absence of abandonment toward yourself during struggle. That changes everything, because suddenly healing is no longer about becoming emotionally untouchable. It becomes about learning how to stay connected to yourself, even when difficult emotions appear. It becomes learning how to comfort yourself instead of criticizing yourself. It becomes learning how to sit beside your pain without immediately trying to erase it. Many people do not realize how much shame they carry around still being human. They think if they were truly healed, they would never feel anxious before difficult conversations. They would never feel sadness after rejection. They would never feel insecure around certain people. They would never feel overwhelmed, emotionally tired, lonely, sensitive, afraid, or uncertain. So every time those feelings return, panic begins. I thought I healed this already. Why am I still like this? What is wrong with me? And without realizing it, they begin treating healing like a performance instead of a relationship with themselves. But real healing is not linear. It is layered. A healed person can still feel grief. A healed person can still overthink sometimes. A healed person can still get triggered. A healed person can still cry unexpectedly. A healed person can still have wounds. The difference is not that the emotions disappear forever. The difference is that those emotions no longer convince the person they are worthless or broken. That is emotional maturity. Not becoming someone without pain, but becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves because of pain. And yet, modern culture often teaches the opposite. People are constantly shown transformed versions of healing. Become more confident, become more attractive, become more productive, become more disciplined, become more unbothered, become more successful, become a better version of yourself. But rarely does anyone ask an important question. What if healing is not about becoming a better version of yourself? What if healing is about becoming a safer place for yourself? That shifts the entire journey, because when healing becomes safety instead of self-erasure, your nervous system finally begins relaxing. You stop waking up every morning trying to reinvent your personality. You stop treating every uncomfortable feeling like evidence that you are failing. You stop forcing yourself into identities that look healed on the outside but feel empty on the inside. There are many people who became strangers to themselves while trying to become emotionally evolved. They learned how to say the right things. They learned calming techniques. They learned how to appear emotionally intelligent. They learned how to look confident. But deep down, they still felt disconnected from who they truly were because their healing journey was secretly built around self-replacement instead of self-understanding. That creates a painful emptiness, because no matter how polished your new identity becomes, the abandoned parts of you still remain inside, waiting to be acknowledged. The scared child inside you does not disappear because you became more productive. The lonely part does not disappear because you became more attractive. The insecure part does not disappear because you learned better communication skills. Ignored. Pain does not heal through performance. It heals through presence, and presence requires honesty. You must become honest about how often your idea of healing was actually an attempt to become acceptable. How often your desire for growth was secretly fueled by shame. How often you wanted transformation because you believed the current version of yourself was too flawed to deserve love. That realization can be painful, because many people discover they were not really trying to heal. They were trying to escape themselves, escape their emotions, escape their sensitivity, escape their awkwardness, escape their past. Escape the parts of themselves they learned to dislike. But healing is not escape. Healing is reconciliation. It is learning how to stop treating yourself like someone you need to outrun. And this becomes especially important when dealing with emotions you were taught to reject. Some people grew up learning that sensitivity was weakness. Others learned that anger was dangerous. Some learned that needing reassurance was embarrassing. Others learned that vulnerability would lead to rejection. So now, as adults, they try to heal by eliminating those traits completely. But the problem is that many of those traits are not signs of failure. They are signs of humanity. Sensitivity is not weakness. Emotional depth is not dysfunction. Needing comfort sometimes is not immaturity. Feeling hurt does not make you broken. The goal is not to erase these parts. The goal is to understand them wisely. A sensitive person does not heal by becoming emotionally numb. They heal by learning boundaries, self-trust, and emotional safety. An anxious person does not heal by becoming perfectly fearless. They heal by learning how to soothe themselves without panic. A lonely person does not heal by pretending they no longer need connection. They heal by learning they deserve healthy connection without shame. Real healing keeps your humanity intact. This is why some people feel exhausted after years of trying to work on themselves. Their healing journey became another impossible standard, another identity to perform, another version of perfection to chase. They became so focused on fixing every emotional reaction that they stopped allowing themselves to simply be alive. And being alive includes imperfection. It includes uncertainty. It includes emotional complexity. It includes setbacks, confusion, grief, fear, tenderness, mistakes, contradictions, and unfinished parts. The healed version of you will still be human. That truth may disappoint the part of you that wanted a final escape from discomfort, but it also creates enormous freedom. Because now healing no longer depends on becoming flawless. It depends on becoming more connected to yourself. That means when fear appears, you do not instantly shame yourself. When sadness returns, you do not panic. When insecurity shows up, you do not conclude that all your healing disappeared overnight. Instead, you stay present. You breathe. You listen. You respond gently. This is how healing becomes sustainable. Not through emotional perfection, but through emotional companionship with yourself. Many people spend years trying to become emotionally untouchable. They want to reach a point where nothing affects them anymore. No rejection hurts, No criticism lingers, no fear appears, no insecurity remains. But emotional numbness is not healing. Emotional shutdown is not peace. A person who feels nothing is not necessarily healed. Sometimes they are simply disconnected. True healing does not harden your heart into stone. It softens your relationship with your own heart. It allows you to feel without drowning. It allows you to care without collapsing. It allows you to experience life without constantly protecting yourself from every possible discomfort. This is why healing often feels less dramatic than people expect. Sometimes healing looks like crying without hating yourself afterward. Sometimes it looks like resting without guilt. Sometimes it looks like speaking honestly instead of pretending to be okay. Sometimes it looks like letting yourself be seen without performing strength constantly. These moments may appear small, but internally they are revolutionary, because they mean you are no longer trying to become someone else in order to deserve peace. You are finally learning how to include yourself in your own compassion. That takes time, especially for people who spent years believing that love only came after transformation. They may struggle to believe they are allowed to be accepted while still imperfect. Their nervous system expects conditions. It expects performance. It expects achievement before softness arrives. So when they first begin practicing self-acceptance, it can feel uncomfortable, almost irresponsible. Part of them fears that if they stop pushing themselves harshly, they will stop growing entirely. But growth built on self-hatred is unstable. Eventually, it collapses under the weight of exhaustion. A person can only run from themselves for so long before burnout arrives. And burnout is often where many people finally realize they cannot keep surviving through self-rejection. They cannot keep trying to transform themselves into worthiness every single day. The body becomes tired, the mind becomes overwhelmed, the soul becomes numb, and suddenly the question changes. Instead of asking, "How do I become someone better?" they begin asking, "Why was I never allowed to simply be human?" That question opens a completely different kind of healing, because now the focus shifts away from performance and toward understanding, away from punishment and toward care, away from becoming someone else and toward reconnecting with the self that got buried underneath years of pressure. This is where many people rediscover parts of themselves they abandoned long ago. Their softness, their creativity, their playfulness, their emotional honesty, their need for rest, their tenderness, their natural personality before shame taught them to edit it constantly. And this rediscovery can feel emotional because many people realize they have not actually hated themselves their whole lives. They hated the versions of themselves that other people rejected, criticized, mocked, or failed to understand. That is different. A child who grows up feeling emotionally unsafe often learns to reshape themselves for survival. They become quieter, tougher, funnier, more useful, more successful, more invisible, more agreeable, less emotional, less needy, less sensitive. Over time, these survival versions become so normal that the person forgets who they originally were underneath all the adaptation. So healing begins to feel confusing because they are not only healing pain, they are rediscovering identity. Who am I when I stop performing? Who am I when I stop constantly correcting myself? Who am I when I stop trying to become emotionally acceptable to everyone else? These are deep questions, and they cannot be answered through more self-improvement alone. They require presence, stillness, curiosity, compassion, because the authentic self rarely returns through force. It returns through safety, and safety changes the nervous system in powerful ways. When you stop trying to become someone else constantly, your body begins unclenching. Your thoughts become quieter. You stop feeling emotionally chased all the time. You stop needing to prove your worth every minute of the day. Life begins feeling less like an audition. That does not mean growth disappears. You still evolve. You still learn. You still become wiser. But now your growth comes from self-respect instead of self-rejection. You are no longer trying to replace yourself. You are trying to care for yourself more honestly. That difference changes the emotional texture of your entire life. Conversations feel less performative. Rest feels less guilty. Mistakes feel less catastrophic. Emotions feel less dangerous. You stop living under the pressure of becoming emotionally perfect. And perhaps most importantly, you stop postponing love for yourself until some future version finally arrives. Because many people unknowingly spend their whole lives saying, "I will finally accept myself when I heal more, when I stop overthinking, when I become more confident, when I stop being emotional, when I become successful, when I become calmer, when I finally get everything right." But that future never fully arrives because human beings are always evolving. There will always be another challenge, another insecurity, another unfinished part. If self-acceptance depends on becoming flawless, peace will always stay out of reach. This is why healing begins to deepen when you finally understand that your current self is not an obstacle to love. Your current self is the one needing love most. Not the future version, not the perfected version, not the emotionally polished version. You, right now, with your fears, your sensitivity, your unfinished healing, your contradictions, your difficult emotions, your humanity. That realization softens something deep inside the body, because the nervous system finally stops waiting to become worthy before allowing itself to breathe. And maybe this is the greatest misunderstanding about healing. People think healing will turn them into someone entirely new. But often, healing is what happens when you finally stop trying so hard to stop being yourself. Not the fearful version shaped by shame. Not the performative version built for survival, but the real self underneath all the pressure. The self that never needed perfection to deserve peace. The self that was exhausted from being treated like a project instead of a person. The self that was quietly waiting all along for permission to exist without constantly becoming someone else first. And after spending so many years trying to become someone more acceptable, another painful truth slowly begins to reveal itself. The reason your mind struggles to rest may not only come from anxiety, overthinking, or fear. It may come from something even deeper. Somewhere along the way, you learned that love could disappear the moment you disappointed someone. And when love feels conditional, the nervous system never fully relaxes. There is a special kind of exhaustion that comes from feeling like you must constantly earn your place in people's hearts. It creates a life where your mind is always working, always adjusting, always scanning for signs that you may no longer be enough. Even during quiet moments, something inside you stays alert. A message gets answered differently, and your chest tightens. Someone becomes distant for a day, and your thoughts begin racing. A small mistake happens, and suddenly you feel emotionally unsafe. Not because the moment itself is catastrophic, but because your nervous system learned long ago that love could become unstable very quickly. This is why some people cannot truly rest, even when nothing bad is happening. Their body remembers what their mind tries to ignore. It remembers what it felt like to lose affection after making mistakes. It remembers what it felt like to be praised one day and criticized the next. It remembers the tension of trying to stay lovable by performing correctly. And over time, the nervous system adapts to that unpredictability by becoming hyper-aware of other people's moods, reactions, and approval. That hyper-awareness follows people into adulthood quietly. They begin reading into every facial expression. Every delayed text message feels loaded with meaning. Every disagreement feels dangerous. Every moment of distance feels like abandonment waiting to happen. And because of this, their mind rarely becomes still. It stays busy trying to protect them from losing connection. This is one of the hidden roots of chronic overthinking. Many people believe they simply think too much. but often the deeper truth is that they are emotionally scanning for safety. Their thoughts are trying to predict rejection before it arrives. They replay conversations because they are searching for signs they may have ruined something. They analyze their tone because they fear saying the wrong thing. They try to become easier to love because somewhere inside they still believe love can disappear if they become inconvenient. That belief changes the entire emotional atmosphere of a person's life, because when love feels conditional, relationships stop feeling safe. They start feeling like emotional tests you must continuously pass. You become careful with your emotions, careful with your needs, careful with your personality. You try not to be too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too needy, too quiet, too difficult, too honest, and eventually you stop showing up naturally. You start performing safety instead. Some people become people pleasers because they learned that harmony protected them from rejection. Others become perfectionists because they learned mistakes brought emotional distance. Some become emotionally independent because needing comfort once led to disappointment. Others become hyperachievers because achievement was the only time they felt seen. But underneath all these survival patterns is often the same fear. If I stop performing correctly, I may lose love. That fear keeps the mind restless. Even in healthy relationships, the nervous system may continue expecting conditions because old emotional patterns do not disappear overnight. A person may genuinely be loved now, but internally they still feel as though one mistake could change everything. So they remain emotionally alert. They monitor themselves constantly. They become terrified of disappointing people, not because they are weak, because their body learned that connection once depended on performance. This is why unconditional love feels so uncomfortable to some people. They do not fully trust it. When someone loves them consistently, they wait for the hidden condition to appear. When someone stays during difficult moments, they become suspicious. When someone reassures them gently, part of them struggles to believe it, because they learned that affection usually came attached to expectations. Be successful, be calm, be useful, be easy, be impressive, be emotionally convenient, be who others need you to be. And if you fail, love becomes colder. This creates enormous tension inside the nervous system because human beings cannot relax where they feel emotionally evaluated. A person who feels constantly evaluated will always remain partially guarded. Their body stays prepared for emotional danger. Their mind keeps scanning for signs that they are losing approval. This is why so many people feel tired after social interactions, even when nothing bad happened. They were not simply talking, they were monitoring, adjusting, performing, predicting, trying to remain emotionally acceptable in real time. That level of internal vigilance drains the body deeply. Some people become so skilled at this that others never notice how anxious they truly are. They appear calm, thoughtful, responsible, caring, high-functioning. But internally, their nervous system is constantly asking, am I still safe here? Am I still loved? Am I still enough? And because the answer never fully feels guaranteed, the mind keeps working overtime. There is a painful irony in this. The more someone fears losing love, the more they often abandon themselves trying to secure it. They become who others need. They suppress emotions. They overextend themselves. They ignore their exhaustion. They apologize excessively. They tolerate mistreatment. They silence their truth. And slowly, they disappear from their own life emotionally. This is one of the deepest wounds conditional love creates. It teaches people that maintaining connection is more important than remaining connected to themselves. So now they constantly shapeshift to survive emotionally. Around one person, they become quieter. Around another, they become stronger. Around another, they become easier. Around another, they become more impressive. But very few people truly know them because they themselves no longer know what it feels like to exist without adaptation. That is heartbreaking, Because beneath all this performance is often a person who desperately wants to rest, a person tired of earning affection, tired of calculating reactions, tired of proving value, tired of feeling emotionally unsafe every time someone's mood changes slightly. But the nervous system does not simply stop fearing conditions because the conscious mind wants peace. The body remembers emotional unpredictability long after the situation ends. This is why healing requires more than positive thinking. A person cannot simply tell themselves, "Relax, you are loved," if their nervous system still expects rejection beneath the surface. Safety must be experienced repeatedly before the body begins believing it. That takes time, especially for people who spent years around emotionally inconsistent love. Sometimes affection came with criticism attached, sometimes care disappeared during conflict, sometimes vulnerability was punished, sometimes mistakes changed how they were treated, sometimes approval depended on achievement, sometimes emotional needs were treated like burdens, and because of this, love stopped feeling steady. It became something fragile, something earned, something easily lost. A child raised in that environment often grows into an adult whose mind never fully turns off emotionally. They become experts at emotional anticipation. They notice tone changes instantly. They sense distance quickly. They overanalyze silence. They prepare for rejection before it happens. People may even compliment them for being emotionally aware without realizing much of that awareness was born from survival. Because when love once felt unstable, paying attention became necessary. The problem is that survival awareness eventually becomes chronic anxiety if it is never softened. The body forgets how to relax into connection. It forgets how to trust that love can remain during imperfection. It forgets how to believe that conflict does not automatically mean abandonment. So even healthy love can feel emotionally unsafe at first because safety itself feels unfamiliar. This creates painful internal conflict. Part of the person wants closeness deeply. Another part fears closeness because closeness once meant vulnerability to rejection, so they become trapped between longing and fear, wanting reassurance but feeling ashamed for needing it, wanting intimacy but fearing exposure, wanting love but expecting conditions. This tension keeps the mind restless even during moments that should feel peaceful, and many people respond to this restlessness by trying harder to become lovable. They improve themselves endlessly. They become more useful, more understanding, more accommodating, more attractive, more emotionally controlled, but the mind still does not rest, because the deeper issue was never lovability. It was safety. A person who does not feel emotionally safe will continue overworking for approval no matter how lovable they already are. This is why external validation never fully solves inner insecurity. Compliments may help temporarily. Success may help temporarily. Reassurance may help temporarily. But if the nervous system still believes love depends on performance, the fear eventually returns. The body keeps waiting for the condition, waiting for the moment affection changes, waiting for the disappointment, waiting for the rejection. This creates exhausting emotional tension because the person never fully settles into connection. They remain partially braced for loss. And living emotionally braced all the time changes people. It changes how they speak, how they love, how they rest, how they trust, how they ask for help, how they react to silence, how they interpret facial expressions, how they experience conflict. Even small misunderstandings can feel enormous because the nervous system is not reacting only to the present moment. It is reacting to old emotional memories layered underneath the current experience. That is important to understand. Sometimes the intensity of your fear is not about the present person at all. It is about every earlier moment where love felt uncertain, every earlier moment where affection disappeared unexpectedly, Every earlier moment where you learned that mistakes could cost connection, those emotional memories stay in the body. And until they are healed gently, the mind keeps trying to protect you by staying alert constantly. But constant alertness is not peace, it is survival. Real peace begins when the nervous system slowly learns a new experience of love. A steadier love, a safer love, a love that does not disappear every time you become imperfect. And this healing must happen internally too, because many people continue treating themselves conditionally long after others stop doing it to them. They only feel worthy when productive, only lovable when useful, only acceptable when calm, only deserving when successful. So even in private, their mind continues threatening them with rejection. If you fail, you will lose value. If you become emotional, people will leave. If you stop performing, nobody will choose you. That internal pressure creates enormous emotional fatigue. A person cannot rest while constantly trying to secure their right to be loved. At some point, healing requires learning that love was never supposed to feel like a performance contract. Love was never supposed to demand that you erase your humanity to maintain connection. Healthy love allows room for imperfection, room for mistakes, room for difficult emotions, room for honesty, room for growth, room for rest. This does not mean healthy relationships have no boundaries or accountability. It means your value as a human being does not disappear every time you struggle. That distinction matters deeply, because many people confuse accountability with rejection. The moment conflict appears, their nervous system assumes love itself is now threatened, so they panic internally. They over-explain, they apologize excessively, they become desperate to repair things immediately. Not because they are irrational, because their body learned that unresolved tension once led to emotional danger. This is why learning emotional safety often feels uncomfortable at first. A calm, stable relationship may initially feel boring or unfamiliar because the nervous system became used to unpredictability. Consistency may feel suspicious. Gentleness may feel undeserved. Stability may feel temporary. But slowly, through repeated safe experiences, the body begins softening. The mind stops scanning as intensely. The chest relaxes. Conversations feel less threatening. Silence feels less dangerous. Conflict feels survivable. And perhaps most importantly, the person stops abandoning themselves every time fear appears. That is a huge turning point in healing, because the goal is not becoming someone who never fears rejection again. The goal is becoming someone who no longer destroys themselves trying to avoid rejection. That changes relationships completely. You stop shape-shifting constantly. You stop performing emotional perfection. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop believing your needs automatically make you difficult. You stop treating love like something you must earn through exhaustion. And little by little, the mind begins resting in ways it never could before. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because connection no longer feels permanently fragile. There is deep healing in realizing that healthy love does not require constant self-erasure. You do not have to become smaller to remain loved. You do not have to become flawless to remain worthy. You do not have to monitor your every emotion to deserve care. You do not have to earn rest by proving your value every day. These truths may sound simple, but for a nervous system shaped by conditional love, they can feel revolutionary. Because conditional love teaches people to survive. Unconditional love teaches people to breathe. And many people are discovering for the first time how exhausted they truly were from holding their breath emotionally all those years. Always waiting, always proving, always monitoring, always adapting, always fearing that one wrong move could cost connection. That is not peace. Peace begins when love no longer feels like something hanging above your head, waiting to be removed. Peace begins when your nervous system realizes that imperfection does not automatically equal abandonment. Peace begins when you stop turning yourself into a project designed to secure affection. Peace begins when you understand that real connection does not require constant performance. And perhaps the deepest healing of all begins when you finally stop treating your own love for yourself as conditional too. Because if you only offer yourself kindness after success, after calmness, after perfection, after achievement, then your mind will remain restless no matter how much external love you receive. The nervous system watches how you treat yourself closely. If you abandon yourself whenever you struggle, your body learns that love is unstable even inside your own mind. But when you begin staying with yourself during fear, shame, sadness, insecurity, exhaustion, and imperfection, something powerful changes internally. You begin becoming a safer place for yourself. And once that happens, the mind slowly stops fighting so hard to secure safety from everywhere else. Because deep down, what the nervous system wanted all along was not perfection. It wanted reassurance that love could survive your humanity. And once you begin to understand how deeply conditional love shaped your inner world, another painful pattern starts becoming impossible to ignore. You realize that much of your life has been built around one exhausting question, repeating quietly beneath everything you do. Have I done enough to deserve my place here today? That question alone can drain the soul for years. There is a kind of pain that rarely looks dramatic from the outside. No one sees bruises, no one hears shouting, no one notices the damage immediately. But inside, the person is constantly exhausted because every single day feels like another attempt to prove they are worthy of existing, worthy of rest, worthy of love, worthy of respect, worthy of peace. This is the quiet violence of trying to earn your worth every day. It begins so subtly that many people mistake it for ambition, responsibility, discipline, or maturity. They push themselves hard. They stay productive. They try to be dependable. They constantly improve. They rarely stop moving. And because society often rewards this behavior, nobody notices the suffering underneath it. But beneath all that effort is often a person terrified that if they stop proving themselves, they will stop mattering. That fear changes the entire way a person lives. It turns rest into guilt. It turns mistakes into shame. It turns ordinary days into emotional evaluations. It turns self-worth into a performance review that never ends. And slowly, life stops feeling like something you experience. It starts feeling like something you must continuously earn access to. Some people wake up already feeling behind before the day even begins. Their nervous system immediately asks what they need to accomplish in order to deserve peace later. Even moments of stillness become uncomfortable because deep down they believe value only exists inside productivity, usefulness, achievement, or emotional perfection. So they keep moving, keep helping, keep producing, keep performing, keep overextending themselves. Not because they truly want to all the time, but because slowing down forces them to face a terrifying question. Who am I when I am not proving something? That question is difficult for many people because their identity became tied to earning worth very early in life. Maybe they were praised only when they succeeded. Maybe they received attention only when they performed well. Maybe they learned that mistakes brought disappointment. Maybe they felt emotionally invisible unless they were useful. Maybe they became the responsible one, the achiever, the caretaker, the emotionally strong one. And over time, their nervous system absorbed a dangerous belief. My value depends on what I can provide. That belief follows people everywhere, into relationships, into careers, into friendships, into healing, into spirituality, into rest. Even self-care becomes another way to earn worth instead of genuinely care for oneself. This is why some people cannot relax during rest days. their body may sit still, but internally they feel anxious, guilty, restless. They begin thinking about what they should be doing instead. Their nervous system interprets stillness as danger because productivity became emotionally connected to safety. And when worth feels conditional upon usefulness, exhaustion becomes inevitable. A human being cannot carry the burden of proving their value every single day without eventually collapsing internally. Yet many people do exactly that for years. They become addicted to being needed because being needed temporarily quiets the fear of being worthless. They become addicted to achievement because success creates temporary emotional relief. They become addicted to helping others because serving people makes them feel valuable. But the relief never lasts long because the wound underneath remains untouched. The wound says, if I stop earning my place, I may lose love. That fear creates a life where the nervous system never truly rests. Even accomplishments become emotionally complicated. A person may achieve something important, but instead of feeling satisfied, their mind immediately moves toward the next thing they must accomplish to remain worthy. There is no arrival, no deep exhale, no lasting peace. Only another task, another expectation, another standard, another attempt to secure value. This creates enormous emotional emptiness because the person slowly loses connection with their inherent worth. They no longer believe they deserve care simply because they are human. Everything becomes transactional emotionally. I deserve rest because I worked hard. I deserve love because I was useful. I deserve kindness because I performed correctly. I deserve acceptance because I did not disappoint anyone. But what happens on the days when you are tired? What happens when you fail? What happens when you are emotionally messy? What happens when you cannot perform? People who build their identity around earned worth often struggle deeply during difficult seasons because their self-esteem collapses the moment they cannot maintain performance. Illness becomes terrifying, burnout becomes shameful. Emotional overwhelm becomes proof of failure because they were never taught that worth remains even when productivity disappears. This is one of the cruelest lessons many people unconsciously absorb growing up. They learn that their humanity alone is not enough. They believe they must compensate for existing by constantly offering something valuable in return. So now they overwork themselves emotionally, trying to justify their own presence. This is why many highly capable people secretly feel exhausted all the time. They are not only carrying responsibilities, they are carrying the emotional burden of believing their worth depends on how well they handle those responsibilities. That pressure is crushing, and what makes it even sadder is that many people become so used to this pressure that they stop recognizing it as suffering. They call it being driven, being disciplined, being ambitious, being responsible. But internally, they are terrified of becoming unimportant. So they keep earning. Every day becomes another audition for worthiness. They smile while exhausted. They help while overwhelmed. They produce while emotionally empty. They push through burnout because stopping feels emotionally unsafe. And eventually, the body begins screaming what the soul has been whispering for years. I cannot survive endless proving. Burnout is often more than physical exhaustion. Sometimes it is the collapse that happens when a person can no longer carry the emotional pressure of earning their existence constantly. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed, the body grows tired, motivation disappears, joy fades, and many people become confused because they spent years doing everything right. But no amount of achievement can permanently soothe a nervous system that believes worth must be earned continuously. This is why external success often fails to create lasting peace. A person may become highly successful while still feeling internally insecure because achievement never healed the deeper belief underneath it. The belief that says, I am only valuable when I perform. That belief creates a very fragile relationship with yourself. Because now your self-worth rises and falls constantly depending on your productivity, appearance, emotional control, social success, usefulness, or accomplishments. One good day makes you feel temporarily enough. One bad day makes you feel worthless again. That emotional instability becomes exhausting. A healthy sense of worth does not disappear every time you struggle. A healthy sense of worth does not require constant evidence. A healthy sense of worth remains present even during imperfection. But many people were never taught that. They were taught performance, comparison, achievement, productivity, image management, emotional suppression, self-sacrifice. They were taught how to earn approval, not how to feel inherently worthy. So now they move through life constantly negotiating with themselves emotionally. I can rest after I finish more. I can feel proud after I improve further. I can relax once I become better. I can love myself after I fix everything. But the finish line keeps moving, because the nervous system is not actually chasing achievement, it is chasing safety. And safety cannot be built on endless conditions. This is why some people secretly feel panic whenever they are not being productive. Without tasks, goals, helping, or achievement, they suddenly feel emotionally exposed. The distractions disappear, and underneath them sits a painful emptiness they have been trying to outrun through constant doing. That emptiness often whispers painful things. You are falling behind. You are wasting time. You are not doing enough. You are becoming lazy. You need to prove yourself again. And because those thoughts feel uncomfortable, the person immediately returns to overworking themselves emotionally, not because they truly want to, because proving feels safer than simply existing. That is heartbreaking. Because human beings were never meant to earn the right to feel valuable every single day. A child does not enter the world needing to justify their existence. They simply exist. They laugh, cry, need comfort, rest, explore, feel emotions openly. But somewhere along the way, many people lose permission to exist naturally. They begin shaping themselves around approval. And approval is dangerous when it becomes the foundation of self-worth, because approval is unstable. Some people will approve of you, others will not. Some days you will succeed, other days you will fail. Some seasons you will feel strong, other seasons you will struggle. If your value depends entirely on external outcomes, your inner world will never feel stable. This is why healing often requires grieving the belief that worth must be earned. That grief can feel enormous because many people built their entire identity around proving themselves. If they stop proving, they fear they will disappear emotionally. They fear becoming ordinary, invisible, unimportant. But constantly earning your worth is not living, it is survival. And survival mode eventually steals joy from everything. Even beautiful moments become difficult to enjoy because the mind keeps calculating productivity and value constantly. A vacation feels undeserved. Rest feels wasteful. Doing nothing feels dangerous. Even hobbies become achievements instead of genuine enjoyment. The person forgets how to simply exist without evaluation. This creates profound emotional disconnection because the nervous system never experiences unconditional internal safety. It is always trying to secure worth through action. Action becomes identity. Performance becomes protection. Achievement becomes emotional survival. But no human being can sustain that forever without losing touch with themselves. Eventually, many people reach a point where they quietly ask, "Why do I feel so empty even after doing everything I was supposed to do?" And often the answer is painful. Because achievement cannot replace self-worth. Productivity cannot replace self-love. Usefulness cannot replace emotional safety. The body knows the difference. The nervous system knows the difference. You can become successful while still feeling emotionally unsafe inside yourself. You can become admired while still feeling internally unworthy. You can become needed while still feeling deeply unseen. This is why healing requires more than external accomplishment. It requires rebuilding your relationship with worth itself. You must slowly learn that your value does not increase on productive days and decrease on difficult days. Your value does not disappear when you rest. Your value does not vanish when you struggle emotionally. Your value does not depend on constant usefulness. These truths may sound obvious intellectually, but emotionally they can feel almost impossible to believe at first, especially for people whose nervous system was trained around conditional approval. The body does not trust unconditional worth immediately. It expects conditions. It expects performance. It expects pressure. So when you first begin practicing gentleness with yourself, guilt often appears quickly. You rest, and guilt whispers. You say no, and guilt whispers. You stop overworking, and guilt whispers. You prioritize yourself, and guilt whispers. Because the old system inside you still believes worth must be earned through sacrifice and exhaustion. But healing begins when you stop obeying that system automatically, not overnight, slowly, patiently. You begin noticing the violence in the way you pressure yourself daily, the violence of denying your exhaustion, the violence of speaking to yourself harshly when you slow down, the violence of believing your humanity must constantly justify itself through performance. And once you notice it clearly, something inside you begins softening. You start realizing how tired you truly are. Not lazy, not weak, tired. Tired of proving, tired of performing, tired of carrying impossible standards, tired of trying to deserve your own existence every day. That realization can feel emotional because many people discover they have not experienced true internal rest in years. Even sleep did not fully restore them because emotionally they were always working, always calculating value, always preparing to prove themselves again tomorrow. No nervous system thrives under permanent evaluation. Human beings need spaces where they are allowed to exist imperfectly without earning permission first. This is why unconditional love feels healing. This is why safe relationships feel healing. This is why genuine acceptance feels healing. Because for a moment, the nervous system stops fighting for worth. And eventually, you must learn to offer that same experience to yourself. You must become someone who does not withdraw kindness from yourself every time you struggle. Someone who does not threaten yourself with worthlessness during difficult seasons. Someone who does not make love conditional upon performance. That is not laziness. That is emotional survival finally becoming emotional safety, and safety changes everything internally. When you stop trying to earn your worth constantly, your body begins relaxing in ways you may never have experienced before. Rest stops feeling dangerous. Slower days stop feeling shameful. You begin allowing yourself to exist without turning every moment into proof of value. That creates enormous freedom. You begin working because you genuinely care, not because your existence depends on achievement. You begin helping others without abandoning yourself completely. You begin resting without feeling like you are failing at life. You begin seeing yourself as human instead of as a machine built for constant output. And slowly, your nervous system begins learning a truth it may have never fully trusted before. You do not have to exhaust yourself to deserve love. You do not have to suffer constantly to deserve rest. You do not have to prove your humanity through endless productivity. You do not have to earn your worth every morning when you wake up, because your worth was never supposed to be a daily performance. It was always supposed to be something you carried naturally simply because you are alive. And once you begin to see that your worth was never meant to be earned every morning, another quiet question starts rising from a deeper place inside you. If worth was never the reward for achievement, then why did so many things you finally fixed still fail to make you feel whole? Why did the thing you blamed for your unhappiness disappear, only for the emptiness to remain sitting there in silence? There is a strange sadness that comes after finally getting what you thought would save you. For years, you may have told yourself that peace would arrive after one specific thing changed. Maybe you thought you would finally feel enough when your body looked different. Maybe you thought you would finally breathe when your money improved. Maybe you thought everything would feel lighter once you became more confident, more successful, more disciplined, more loved, more respected, more healed. So you worked, you pushed, you waited, you built your hope around that one change, and then it happened. The thing shifted, the goal came closer, the problem got solved, the flaw became smaller, the life looked better from the outside, but inside something still felt empty. That emptiness can be confusing because it does not make sense at first. You thought the weight would disappear. You thought joy would rush in. You thought your mind would finally say, "There it is, now I can rest." But instead, after a short moment of relief, the old ache returns in a different form. And now the pain feels even more frightening because the excuse you used to explain it is gone. Before you could say, "I feel this way because I have not fixed that yet." But after you fix it, what do you say? This is where many people begin to panic quietly. They look around at the life they worked so hard to improve, and they wonder why their heart still feels untouched. They feel guilty for not feeling happier. They feel ungrateful for still feeling heavy. They feel ashamed because everyone else may see progress, but inside they still feel strangely far from peace. And that is the moment when deep healing begins asking for honesty, because sometimes the thing you blamed was never the real wound. It was only the place where the wound chose to speak. This is hard to accept because blaming one specific problem gives the mind something clear to chase. It says, "When I fix this, I will finally be free." That belief feels comforting because it makes pain seem controllable. It gives suffering a simple shape. It creates a finish line. And human beings love finish lines because finish lines promise relief. But emotional pain is not always that simple. Sometimes what you call the problem is only the surface. Beneath it sits something older, quieter, and much more tender. The body you blamed may not have been the real wound. The real wound may have been years of feeling unworthy of being seen. The achievement you chased may not have been the real solution. The real ache may have been the need to finally feel valuable without proving anything. The relationship you thought would complete you may not have been the missing piece. The deeper hunger may have been the desire to feel safe inside yourself. And when the deeper wound remains unnamed, fixing the surface problem brings only temporary relief. This is why so many people feel confused after major life changes. They lose the weight, but still criticize the mirror. They get the job, but still feel like they are pretending. They receive the love, but still fear being abandoned. They make more money, but still feel unsafe. They move away, start over, change their routine, improve their habits, and still wake up with the same quiet heaviness living inside them. Not because the changes were useless, but because external change cannot fully heal internal disconnection. It can help, it can support healing, it can create better conditions, but it cannot replace the deeper work of meeting the pain you were hoping those changes would erase. That is where many people become trapped. They assume the emptiness means they chose the wrong goal, so they immediately search for another thing to fix, another habit, another flaw, another dream, another transformation. They think, maybe this was not enough, maybe I need more. More success, more beauty, more control, more discipline, more recognition, more healing, more achievement. And the chase begins again. But if the root wound is never touched, every new goal becomes another temporary distraction from the same old ache. This does not mean goals are bad. Growth is not the enemy. Improvement is not the problem. The danger begins when you place your entire emotional rescue inside one future outcome. Because then, when the outcome arrives and your heart still feels lonely, you may begin to believe something is deeply wrong with you. But maybe nothing is wrong with you. Maybe you are simply trying to use achievement to answer a question only acceptance could answer. That question is often simple but painful. Am I enough as I am? Many people spend years trying to answer that question with evidence. They gather achievements like proof. They gather compliments like proof. They gather body changes, money, success, knowledge, discipline, relationships, and approval. They bring all of it before their own wounded heart and say, "See, am I enough now?" But the wounded heart does not heal through evidence alone. It heals through safety. It heals through presence. It heals when you finally stop using life as a courtroom where you must keep proving your worth. This is why you may feel empty after fixing the thing you blamed, because the deeper part of you was not asking for another achievement. It was asking to be heard. It was asking to be comforted. It was asking for permission to stop performing. It was asking you to stop treating the present version of yourself as someone who must be replaced before peace is allowed. There are people who spend years blaming their loneliness on not being attractive enough. So they improve their appearance. They become more polished. People notice them more. They receive more attention. But after the excitement fades, they still feel unseen. Why? Because being looked at is not the same as being known. Attention is not the same as connection. Admiration is not the same as safety. The real wound may never have been appearance. The real wound may have been the fear that if people saw the unpolished self, they would leave. So the mirror changes, but the fear remains. Others blame their emptiness on lack of success. They believe once they achieve something impressive, they will finally feel secure inside. So they work hard, they build, they prove, they win. And for a moment, they feel lifted. But soon the old pressure returns. Now they must maintain the success. Now they must protect the image. Now they must keep proving they deserve the position they reached. The goal that was supposed to free them becomes another cage. Because the deeper wound was not failure. It was conditional worth. And success cannot heal conditional worth if you still believe you are only as valuable as your latest achievement. Some people blame their pain on being single. They believe love will finally silence the ache. Then they enter a relationship, and at first, everything feels hopeful. But soon, their fear begins to rise. They worry about being left. They overthink every shift in tone. They become afraid of needing too much. They feel empty, even beside someone who cares. Because the deeper wound was not simply the absence of a partner. It was the absence of inner safety. And no relationship, no matter how kind, can fully replace the work of becoming safe with yourself. This is not meant to sound discouraging. It is meant to bring clarity, because when you understand this, you stop blaming yourself for not feeling happy after fixing the outer problem. You stop calling yourself ungrateful. You stop thinking you are broken because your heart did not heal on schedule. You begin to see that the emptiness is not proof of failure. It is information. It is your inner world saying, there is something deeper here. That deeper thing often begins with the pain you learned to cover instead of feel. Many people learned early that certain emotions were too inconvenient, too shameful, too dangerous, or too unwanted. So instead of feeling those emotions, they became fixers. If they felt insecure, they fixed their image. If they felt unworthy, they chased achievement. If they felt lonely, they became useful. If they felt afraid, they controlled everything. If they felt ashamed, they tried to become perfect. Fixing became a way to avoid feeling. But feelings do not disappear because you build a better life around them. They wait, quietly, patiently, sometimes for years. And when you finally solve the thing you blamed, those buried feelings may rise because the distraction is gone. The mind no longer has the same excuse. The heart finally has space to speak. And what it says may be uncomfortable. I was never only upset about that. I was carrying something older. This is why emptiness can become a doorway if you do not run from it. Most people immediately try to fill it. They look for another target, another plan, another thing to fix. But what if, for once, you did not rush? What if you let the emptiness speak before trying to silence it? What if the emptiness is not your enemy, but the first honest space you have had in years? Sometimes emptiness appears when a false promise collapses. The promise said, "When you fix this, you will finally be whole." Then you fix it, and the promise breaks. At first, that feels painful, but it is also freeing because now you can stop chasing the wrong cure. You can stop handing your entire peace to one future event. You can stop believing that one change will finally make you acceptable to yourself. And you can begin asking better questions, not "what else is wrong with me?" but "what part of me still feels unloved even after this change?" Not "why am I not happy yet?" but "what was I hoping this achievement would prove?" Not "what do I need to fix next?" but "what have I been avoiding feeling?" These questions are gentle, but they are powerful. They move you from self-correction into self-understanding. And self-understanding reaches places self-improvement cannot touch. Because many times the emptiness after a solved problem is grief. Grief that you spent so long believing one flaw was the reason you were unlovable. Grief that you blamed your body, your personality, your past, your sensitivity, your lack of success, your awkwardness, your emotions, when really you were carrying a wound that needed compassion. Grief that you chased a version of yourself you thought would finally deserve kindness, only to realize kindness was needed long before the transformation. That grief deserves gentleness. It is painful to realize that you may have punished yourself for years over something that was never the full truth. Maybe you thought, "If I become more confident, I will finally stop feeling small." But the smallness came from years of being dismissed. Maybe you thought, "If I become more successful, I will finally stop feeling worthless." But the worthlessness came from never being loved without conditions. Maybe you thought, "If I become less emotional, I will finally be easier to love." But your emotions were never the enemy. They were carrying messages you had not learned how to hear. When this becomes clear, the heart may feel tender, because you realize the thing you were fighting was often only the messenger. The body was a messenger. The anxiety was a messenger. The loneliness was a messenger. The insecurity was a messenger. The overthinking was a messenger. The emptiness itself was a messenger. And instead of listening, you may have spent years trying to silence the message by fixing everything around it. That realization can begin a more honest kind of healing. A healing that no longer asks, "How do I become impressive enough to stop hurting?" but asks, "Where did I first learn that I had to be impressive to deserve peace?" This is where depth begins, because surface fixing can make life look better, but deeper healing makes life feel safer. Surface fixing can change your appearance, habits, status, and environment. Deeper healing changes the way you relate to yourself when none of those things are enough to protect you from being human. And that is what many people are truly craving. Not just a better life, a safer inner world. They want to wake up without immediately needing to prove something. They want to rest without guilt. They want to be loved without performing. They want to make mistakes without collapsing into shame. They want to feel joy without fearing it will disappear. They want to exist without constantly checking whether they have earned the right to feel okay. That is the longing underneath many goals. But because the world teaches us to chase visible solutions, we often misread the longing. We think we want the perfect body, when we really want to stop feeling ashamed. We think we want endless success, when we really want to feel secure. We think we want everyone's approval, when we really want to stop abandoning ourselves. We think we want control, when we really want safety. This is why fixing the blamed thing can still leave you empty. Because the real desire was not always the thing itself. The real desire was the feeling you thought the thing would finally give you. Peace, belonging, worth, freedom, safety, love. And when the thing does not deliver those feelings permanently, disappointment rises. But disappointment can become wisdom if you let it. It can teach you that no single external fix can carry the full weight of your unhealed heart. It can teach you to stop asking one achievement to do the work of deep acceptance. It can teach you that healing must reach the place where the original belief was formed, the belief that you were not enough, the belief that you had to become more before you could rest, the belief that something about you made love difficult, the belief that peace would arrive only after you corrected yourself completely. Those beliefs are not healed by fixing one problem. They are healed by being questioned, softened, and replaced with something more true. And the truth is, you were never meant to wait until everything was fixed before feeling worthy of tenderness. You deserved tenderness during the struggle. You deserved care before the breakthrough. You deserved patience while you were confused. You deserved compassion even when you were still repeating old patterns. That may be hard to receive because many people only know how to offer themselves kindness after improvement. They say, "I will be gentle with myself once I stop messing up." But that is backwards. Gentleness is not the reward after healing. Gentleness is part of what makes healing possible. This is why emptiness after success can be such an important teacher. It shows you where you were using achievement as permission to finally love yourself. And when the achievement fails to create lasting love, you are invited to stop outsourcing your worth to outcomes. That invitation can feel scary, because if you are no longer chasing one big fix, what do you do with the pain? You sit with it differently. You stop rushing to explain it away. You stop immediately turning it into another project. You listen for what it has been trying to say. Maybe the emptiness says, "I am tired of being useful just to feel valuable." Maybe it says, "I do not know who I am when I am not chasing approval." Maybe it says, "I reached the goal, but I still do not feel safe being myself." Maybe it says, "I wanted this thing to prove I am worthy, but I still do not believe it." That kind of honesty is not weakness. It is a doorway into truth. And truth is often quieter than the goals we chase. It does not always arrive with dramatic emotion. Sometimes it arrives as a tired sigh, a quiet sadness, a strange pause after the celebration, a moment where you finally admit, "This did not heal what I thought it would." That admission may hurt, but it also frees you from chasing the same pattern again, because now you can begin looking beneath the surface. You can begin asking what your life has been trying to compensate for. You can notice the difference between wanting something because it brings joy and wanting something because you believe it will finally make you acceptable. You can begin separating healthy desire from wounded desperation. That separation matters. Healthy desire feels expansive. It allows room for peace now and growth later. Wounded desperation feels tight. It says, "I cannot be okay until this changes." Healthy desire says, "This may enrich my life." Wounded desperation says, "This must save my life emotionally." When you understand the difference, your goals become lighter. You can still improve your life, but you stop asking every improvement to become your savior. You can still heal, but you stop treating healing like a final escape from being human. You can still want change, but you stop hating yourself while waiting for change to happen. That is where real freedom begins. Because the emptiness after fixing the thing you blamed is not there to punish you. It is there to redirect you inward. It is there to show you that the deepest pain was never only about the thing you changed. It is there to guide you toward the part of yourself you kept overlooking while chasing solutions. The part that needed comfort, the part that needed safety, the part that needed permission to stop proving, the part that needed love without a condition attached. And when you finally turn toward that part, something soft begins to happen. You stop seeing emptiness as failure. You begin seeing it as space. Space where old illusions have fallen away. Space where you no longer have to pretend the next fix will save you completely. Space where a more honest relationship with yourself can begin. That space may feel quiet at first, maybe even uncomfortable, but peace often begins quietly. It begins when the chase slows down. It begins when the mind stops blaming one thing for all its pain. It begins when you realize that the life you improved still needs a self who feels safe enough to live in it. Because what good is a better life if you still treat yourself like someone unworthy of enjoying it? What good is success if you still cannot rest? What good is admiration if you still feel unseen? What good is change if it only creates another standard to maintain? Deep healing asks you to stop using future improvements as hiding places from present pain. It asks you to meet yourself now, not after the next breakthrough. It asks you to stop turning every ache into a target and start listening to the story underneath it. And when you do that, the emptiness slowly changes. It becomes less like a hole and more like an opening into honesty, an opening into tenderness, an opening into a life where you no longer need to blame one flaw, one failure, one missing achievement, or one unfinished part of yourself for the pain you were never taught how to hold. Because maybe the peace you wanted was never waiting on the other side of fixing that one thing. Maybe it was waiting in the moment you finally stopped asking that one thing to prove you were worthy of love. And once you begin to understand that fixing every external problem cannot heal a deeper wound of worthiness, another fear quietly rises into view. A fear many people carry so deeply that they hardly notice how much it controls their life. The fear of being seen exactly as they are, without achievements, without constant improvement, without evidence that they are becoming better. Because somewhere inside, they believe progress is the only thing protecting them from rejection. There is a painful vulnerability in standing still long enough for people to see you without your usual signs of growth. No new achievement to mention, no impressive update, no emotional breakthrough, no polished version of yourself to present. Just you, unfinished, uncertain, still learning, still carrying flaws that have not disappeared yet. For many people, that feels terrifying. Not because they are shallow or fake, but because progress became their emotional armor. It became the thing that helped them feel valuable, acceptable, safe, and worthy of attention. As long as they were improving, healing, achieving, evolving, or overcoming something, they could avoid the deeper fear underneath it all. What if I am not enough without all of this? That question sits quietly beneath many people's lives. It follows them into conversations, into relationships, into social media, into work, into healing, into friendships, into the way they speak about themselves. They feel pressure to always be moving forward, always becoming wiser, stronger, healthier, calmer, more successful, more emotionally evolved. Because if progress stops, they fear exposure. Exposure of the insecure self, the confused self, the exhausted self, the version of them that still struggles, the version that is not inspiring, impressive, or fully healed yet. This creates a strange emotional performance where people begin organizing their identity around visible improvement. They become attached not only to growth itself, but to appearing like someone who is always growing. And while growth can be beautiful, constantly needing to appear improved becomes emotionally exhausting, because human beings are not machines designed for endless upward motion. Some seasons are slow, some seasons are messy, some seasons are uncertain, some seasons involve grief, confusion, setbacks, stillness, or emotional exhaustion. But many people secretly feel ashamed during those seasons because they no longer know how to exist without a mask of progress. This mask can look different for everyone. For some people, it is productivity. They stay busy constantly, so nobody notices how emotionally lost they feel inside. As long as they are accomplishing things, they feel protected from deeper vulnerability. For others, the mask is healing itself. They always speak about personal growth, breakthroughs, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and transformation. But privately, they feel terrified of being seen in moments where they are still struggling deeply. Others use confidence as the mask. They appear strong, independent, calm, and unbothered, while secretly carrying enormous fear of being emotionally exposed. And some people use helpfulness. They become the one everyone relies on because usefulness helps them avoid the fear that they may not be lovable simply for existing. But beneath every version of the mask is often the same quiet terror. If people see the unfinished parts of me, they may stop valuing me. That fear creates enormous pressure inside the nervous system, because now every interaction becomes partly performative. You feel pressure to present a version of yourself that appears stable, improving, healing, progressing, or succeeding. Even when you are hurting internally, you may feel unable to admit it fully because vulnerability feels dangerous without proof that you are working on it. This is why many people struggle to simply say, "I am having a hard time." Instead, they quickly add explanations. "But I'm improving. But I'm learning from it. But I'm healing. But I'm trying." Because they fear being seen without visible progress attached to the pain. Pain alone feels too risky, and this often begins very early in life. Some people learned that they received more attention when they performed well. Others learned they were praised when they appeared mature, strong, successful, resilient, or emotionally composed. Some learned that vulnerability made others uncomfortable. Others learned that struggling openly brought criticism instead of comfort. So they adapted. They became high-functioning, self-aware, independent, productive, helpful, impressive, and slowly they stopped allowing themselves to simply be human in public. Everything became filtered through the need to remain emotionally acceptable. That creates deep loneliness, because people may admire the mask without truly knowing the person underneath it. Others may praise your growth while never seeing your fear. They may celebrate your strength while never noticing how tired you are from carrying it constantly. And over time, you may begin wondering whether people would still value you if the progress stopped for a while. Would they still stay if you were confused? Would they still care if you were not productive? Would they still love you if you were emotionally messy? Would they still see you if you were not constantly becoming better? Those questions hurt because many people secretly do not know the answer, not only because of how others treated them, but because they themselves have become uncomfortable with their own unfinished humanity. This is the hidden danger of building identity around progress. You begin believing your evolving self is lovable, but your present self is not. So you keep reaching forward emotionally, trying to stay one step ahead of exposure. But healing cannot happen while constantly running from your current self. Eventually, the nervous system becomes exhausted from carrying the mask. Maintaining it requires constant emotional management. You monitor how you appear. You carefully choose what struggles to reveal. You edit your emotions into digestible forms. You turn pain into wisdom quickly because raw pain feels too unsafe to show. And this creates emotional disconnection from yourself because some feelings do not need immediate transformation. Some feelings simply need room to exist honestly. Grief does not always arrive with a lesson immediately. Confusion does not always become clarity overnight. Some seasons are unresolved for a while. But many people feel guilty for unresolved emotions because they believe healing should always look like visible progress. So instead of sitting honestly with themselves, they rush to improve their pain into something presentable. That rush creates emotional loneliness. The nervous system never fully experiences acceptance because even vulnerability becomes partly managed. The person may share their struggles, but only the polished version. only the version already packaged with growth, insight, or progress attached. Rarely the raw version, rarely the uncertain version, rarely the deeply unfinished version. And yet, those hidden parts often carry the deepest need for compassion. There is something profoundly healing about being seen without your usual armor and discovering you are still worthy of care. But many people avoid this experience because they are terrified the opposite will happen. They fear people will lose respect, interest, attraction, admiration, or love once the polished image cracks. So they continue performing progress. Even exhaustion becomes hidden. Even loneliness becomes hidden. Even fear becomes hidden beneath motivational language and emotional composure. But the body always knows when something is being carried alone. This is why some people feel emotionally tired even around people who love them. They are not resting fully in connection because they are still partially managing perception. A part of them remains emotionally guarded. A part of them is still asking, "Am I acceptable like this?" That question keeps the nervous system alert. True rest requires safety, and safety becomes difficult when you believe your value depends on remaining emotionally impressive. Many people secretly fear stagnation, not only because they want growth, but because stagnation feels like exposure. If they stop progressing, they worry others will finally notice the flaws they were trying to outrun through achievement and healing. This fear becomes especially strong in cultures obsessed with optimization. Everywhere, people are told to become better versions of themselves constantly, heal faster, achieve more, stay disciplined, stay productive, stay emotionally evolved, keep growing. And while growth itself is not harmful, turning growth into identity can quietly create shame around simply being human. Because human beings are cyclical, not mechanical. Some seasons expand you, others slow you down. Some seasons are full of clarity, others are full of uncertainty. Some seasons feel strong, others feel fragile. This is normal. But people wearing a mask of progress often feel unable to tolerate their own slower seasons. They panic when they are not improving visibly. They feel guilty when they are emotionally stuck. They compare themselves constantly to who they think they should be by now. And underneath all of it is often the same fear. If I stop progressing, people may finally see the parts of me I have been hiding. That fear can become so powerful that even healing becomes performative. The person begins measuring their emotional worth by how evolved they appear. They pressure themselves to heal beautifully, to suffer gracefully, to process perfectly, to emerge wiser quickly. But healing is not always graceful. Sometimes it is messy. Sometimes it is repetitive. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it looks like surviving one difficult day without abandoning yourself. The nervous system does not heal according to performance timelines. It heals through safety, honesty, and consistency. And honesty requires removing the mask eventually, not all at once, gently, slowly. You begin admitting when you are tired instead of pretending you are growing through everything effortlessly. You begin allowing yourself to be uncertain without apologizing for it immediately. You begin realizing that your worth does not disappear during slower seasons. That realization changes something deep inside the body. Because the body is exhausted from constant self-presentation. It is exhausted from trying to appear emotionally acceptable at all times. It is exhausted from needing every struggle to become proof of growth instantly. There is tremendous relief in finally allowing yourself to exist without performing improvement constantly. To simply say, I do not know. I am struggling. I am tired. I am still figuring this out. Without immediately trying to transform those statements into something inspirational, that honesty creates real connection. Not performance-based connection, human connection. The kind where you no longer need to earn care through emotional perfection. Many people have spent years believing they must become emotionally impressive to deserve love. So they hide their neediness, hide their confusion, hide their fear, hide their grief, hide the parts that still feel small, but hiding creates isolation. Because the hidden self never fully experiences acceptance, only the mask does. And eventually, the soul becomes lonely from being unseen. This is why some people secretly crave spaces where they no longer have to perform strength constantly, spaces where they can exhale emotionally, spaces where they do not have to prove they are healing beautifully, spaces where they are allowed to simply be human without explanation. That longing is not weakness, it is the nervous system searching for safety. Because safety is not only physical, safety is being able to exist imperfectly without fearing abandonment. Safety is being emotionally visible without feeling shame. Safety is knowing you do not have to transform your pain into productivity before deserving compassion. And many people have never fully experienced that kind of emotional safety, so they continue wearing the mask. The smiling mask, the productive mask, the healed mask, the independent mask, the wise mask, the successful mask, the emotionally composed mask. But masks become heavy after a while, especially when the person underneath is quietly exhausted. This exhaustion often shows up in subtle ways. The person may lose motivation suddenly, feel emotionally numb, avoid vulnerability, withdraw socially, feel anxious without understanding why, become deeply tired around people, not because they are broken, because maintaining emotional performance consumes enormous energy. The nervous system longs for rest from constant self-management. This is why removing the mask often feels both terrifying and liberating at the same time. Terrifying because vulnerability risks rejection, liberating because authenticity finally allows the body to stop bracing so intensely. And authenticity does not mean oversharing every wound publicly. It means you stop abandoning your real feelings internally just to maintain an image. That distinction matters. A person can appear composed while still remaining emotionally honest with themselves privately. They can stop forcing every emotion into a progress narrative. They can stop turning every struggle into evidence of personal failure. This creates enormous inner freedom. Because now healing is no longer about appearing transformed all the time. It becomes about remaining connected to yourself honestly through every season. The strong seasons, the uncertain seasons, the joyful seasons, the grieving seasons, the productive seasons, the exhausted seasons, all of them, without deciding your worth based on which season you are currently in. This is where many people finally begin experiencing deeper peace. Not because their life becomes perfect, but because they stop requiring themselves to appear perfect in order to deserve belonging. That changes relationships too. When you stop performing progress constantly, you begin attracting more honest connection. Conversations become less filtered. Vulnerability becomes less terrifying. You stop competing emotionally. You stop needing to impress people with how healed you are. And strangely enough, people often feel closer to you when the mask softens. Because human beings connect through honesty more deeply than performance. Not perfection, not polished transformation. Honesty. There is something deeply comforting about someone who no longer needs to pretend they have everything figured out. Someone who can say, "I am still learning," without shame. Someone who can admit fear without collapsing. Someone who can be imperfect without disappearing emotionally. That kind of authenticity creates safety for others too. Because when one person stops performing emotional perfection, it quietly gives others permission to stop performing too. This is one of the hidden gifts of healing honestly. You stop spreading pressure. You stop making humanity feel like failure. You stop contributing to the illusion that everyone else has fully figured themselves out. And perhaps most importantly, you stop carrying the crushing burden of trying to stay emotionally impressive all the time. That burden is heavier than most people realize, because underneath it often lives a child who once learned that being lovable depended on being exceptional somehow. Exceptional emotionally, exceptional academically, exceptional socially, exceptional in maturity, usefulness, calmness, resilience, or success. So now, ordinary humanity feels unsafe, but healing slowly teaches the nervous system a different truth. You do not have to constantly prove your evolution to deserve connection. You do not have to wear progress like armor every moment of your life. You do not have to become endlessly improved before allowing yourself to be seen. You are allowed to exist unfinished, allowed to have unresolved emotions, allowed to move slowly sometimes, allowed to struggle without turning it into a motivational lesson immediately, allowed to be deeply human. That realization softens something profound inside the body, because finally there is room to breathe, room to stop performing, room to stop editing yourself constantly, room to stop chasing worth through visible transformation. And in that room, something beautiful begins happening quietly. The nervous system starts relaxing, the heart starts opening, the mask starts loosening, and underneath all the pressure to become someone impressive enough to deserve love, you begin rediscovering the self that never actually needed the performance in the first place. And once the mask begins loosening, another truth quietly rises from underneath it. Many of the ways you criticize yourself today were not born from self-hatred originally. They began as survival. They began as ways a younger version of you tried to stay safe, loved, accepted, or emotionally protected in environments that did not always feel steady. And when you finally see that clearly, something inside you begins to soften. There are moments in adulthood that seem small on the surface, but trigger enormous reactions inside the body. A certain tone of voice makes your chest tighten. Someone being disappointed in you feels unbearable. A mistake ruins your whole day. Silence from another person sends your thoughts racing. Criticism lingers for weeks. You apologize too quickly. You over-explain. You feel guilty resting. You panic when someone seems upset with you. And deep down, part of you already knows the reaction is bigger than the moment itself. That is because the body is not only responding to the present, it is remembering the past. Many of the habits people now call overthinking, people-pleasing, perfectionism, emotional sensitivity, or self-criticism did not appear randomly. They were built slowly during childhood as ways to survive emotionally. A child who grows up in unpredictability becomes watchful. A child who grows up around criticism becomes self-correcting. A child who grows up around emotional distance becomes hyper-aware of other people's moods. A child who feels unsafe learns to adapt quickly, and adaptation keeps children alive emotionally. The problem is that the nervous system often carries those same survival habits into adulthood long after the original environment is gone. So now, as an adult, you may still be living emotionally as if danger is always nearby. You may criticize yourself before others can. You may monitor your behavior constantly. You may overwork to avoid feeling worthless. You may become terrified of disappointing people. You may hide emotions because vulnerability once felt unsafe. Not because you are broken, because your nervous system learned these patterns early and repeated them for years. This changes the way you see yourself, because when people only look at the adult behavior without understanding the original pain underneath it, they often shame themselves unfairly. They call themselves weak, needy, dramatic, too sensitive, too anxious, too emotional, too difficult. But many times those reactions are simply old survival strategies still trying to protect you. A child who had to stay alert to avoid conflict may become an adult who cannot relax fully around people. A child who learned love could disappear after mistakes may become an adult obsessed with perfection. A child who felt unseen may become an adult who constantly seeks validation. A child who was punished for emotions may become an adult disconnected from their own feelings. A child who had to become emotionally mature too early may become an adult who struggles to rest. None of these patterns appeared out of nowhere. And understanding that creates compassion, not excuses. Compassion. There is a huge difference. Compassion does not mean harmful behaviors should never change. It means you stop approaching yourself like an enemy while trying to understand why those behaviors exist in the first place. Because people heal differently when they feel understood instead of attacked. Many adults still carry an inner environment shaped by childhood emotional conditions. If love felt unstable, they still expect instability. If criticism felt constant, they still criticize themselves automatically. If emotional safety was rare, they still struggle to trust calmness fully. This is why certain reactions feel almost automatic. The nervous system does not pause and think logically first. It reacts according to old emotional conditioning. A person who grew up around anger may panic during small disagreements. A person who grew up feeling invisible may overperform to gain attention. A person who grew up being blamed may carry chronic guilt. A person who grew up around emotional unpredictability may struggle to trust peaceful relationships. The adult mind may know the present moment is different, but the body still carries the old emotional map. That map shapes everything quietly. It shapes how you speak to yourself after mistakes. It shapes how safe you feel receiving love. It shapes how much rest you allow yourself. It shapes how you respond to criticism. It shapes how much pressure you place on yourself daily. And many people spend years blaming themselves for reactions that originally developed to help them survive emotionally. This is why self-criticism often feels so deeply automatic. It was not originally about self-hatred, it was about self-protection. Somewhere along the way, your nervous system learned that criticizing yourself first could help you avoid pain later. If you corrected yourself quickly enough, maybe others would not reject you. If you became perfect enough, maybe conflict would decrease. If you stayed useful enough, maybe people would keep loving you. If you monitored yourself constantly, maybe you could stay emotionally safe. Those patterns made sense to the younger version of you. But survival habits that protect a child can quietly imprison an adult. Because now the danger may be gone, yet the body continues acting as if emotional survival still depends on constant self-monitoring. This creates enormous exhaustion internally. Imagine carrying invisible emotional armor every single day without realizing it. Armor against rejection, against disappointment, against criticism, against abandonment, against emotional unpredictability. After years of wearing that armor, the body forgets what softness feels like. This is why some people struggle deeply with self-compassion. Gentleness feels unfamiliar. The nervous system trusts control more than kindness, because control once felt safer. Harshness feels normal because criticism became the language of survival early on. So even when life becomes calmer, the inner voice remains harsh, not because the person enjoys suffering, because their nervous system still believes harshness prevents danger. This is why healing childhood survival habits takes patience. You are not only changing thoughts, you are teaching the body that it no longer has to survive the same way. That takes time. The body learns through repetition, safety, and experience, not through shame. Many people unknowingly continue parenting themselves the same way they were emotionally treated growing up. If they were criticized often, they criticize themselves automatically. If they were emotionally dismissed, they dismiss their own feelings now. If they were expected to be perfect, they continue demanding perfection internally. And because these patterns feel familiar, they can feel strangely correct, even when they hurt deeply. This is one of the hardest parts of healing, realizing that the voice in your head may not actually be your true voice. It may be an internalized survival system shaped by years of emotional conditioning. That realization can feel emotional because suddenly you begin seeing yourself differently. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What happened to me that taught me to survive this way?" That question opens the door to deeper understanding, because there is usually a reason underneath the reaction. The person who over-explains may have once been misunderstood constantly. The person who fears disappointing others may have once experienced love as emotionally unstable. The person who apologizes excessively may have once been blamed unfairly. The person who struggles to rest may have once learned that worth depended on usefulness. The person who hides emotions may have once learned vulnerability was unsafe. These patterns were intelligent adaptations once, but now they may be creating suffering instead of protection. This is where healing becomes complicated emotionally, because part of you may want to let go of these habits, while another part fears letting go will create danger. The nervous system often clings to old patterns, not because they feel good, but because they feel familiar. Familiarity can feel safer than freedom, even painful familiarity. That is why many people stay trapped in cycles of overthinking, self-criticism, perfectionism, or emotional suppression long after those patterns stop helping them. The body keeps repeating what it once learned was necessary, and when people try to change these habits through force alone, they often become frustrated. They say things like, "Why am I still like this? Why can't I just relax? Why do I overreact so much? Why can't I stop criticizing myself?" But healing survival habits is not about shaming yourself into behaving differently. It is about helping the nervous system feel safe enough to stop protecting you in outdated ways. That requires gentleness, not weakness, gentleness. There is a huge emotional difference between saying, "Why am I like this?" and saying, "Something inside me learned to survive this way for a reason." One creates shame, the other creates understanding. And understanding is what allows healing to begin. Many adults are secretly carrying younger versions of themselves that never fully felt emotionally safe. The younger self may still fear rejection intensely, still fear conflict, still fear failure, still fear abandonment, still fear not being enough. And because those fears were never fully soothed, they continue shaping adult behavior quietly from underneath. This is why certain emotional reactions can feel so young internally. A small criticism may suddenly make you feel tiny. Being ignored may create panic disproportionate to the situation. A disappointed look may trigger deep shame instantly. The adult part of you knows the reaction is intense, but the younger wounded part is reacting from old emotional memory. This does not mean you are childish. It means pain stored early in life still needs compassion. And many people never received that compassion when they first needed it. Instead, they learned to harden, to perform, to adapt, to survive. Some became emotionally invisible to avoid conflict. Others became exceptional to secure approval. Others became caretakers to maintain connection. Others became perfectionists to avoid criticism. But underneath all those survival identities was often a child simply trying to feel emotionally safe. That child still exists inside many adults today, not literally frozen in time, but emotionally influencing reactions beneath awareness. This is why healing often involves grieving childhood experiences more deeply than people expect. Not always dramatic trauma. Sometimes grief comes from emotional absence, lack of safety, lack of reassurance, lack of consistent tenderness, lack of permission to simply be human. Many people grew up physically cared for but emotionally unsupported. Their emotions were minimized, their fears dismissed, their needs treated like burdens, their vulnerability ignored, their worth tied to performance. And because there was no obvious catastrophe, they often invalidate their own pain later. They say, "It wasn't that bad. Others had it worse. My parents tried their best." And all of those things may be true, but pain does not disappear because someone else suffered differently. The nervous system responds to emotional reality, not comparison. A child who consistently felt unsafe emotionally adapts accordingly, and those adaptations eventually become personality patterns in adulthood. This is why healing requires honesty without blame. You do not need to demonize your past to acknowledge how it shaped you. You do not need to hate the people who hurt you in order to recognize the impact. You simply need enough honesty to stop treating your current reactions like random flaws disconnected from your history. Because when you understand where the patterns came from, something inside you often softens. The self-criticism becomes less vicious. The shame loosens slightly. The reactions start making emotional sense. And perhaps for the first time, you stop viewing yourself as defective and begin seeing yourself as someone who adapted intelligently to difficult emotional conditions. That perspective changes healing completely. Because now healing is not about destroying old parts of yourself. It is about updating old survival systems that no longer serve you. The perfectionism no longer needs to protect you constantly. The hypervigilance no longer needs to scan every room. The people-pleasing no longer needs to secure every relationship. The emotional suppression no longer needs to hide vulnerability at all costs. Those parts can begin relaxing slowly, not through force, through safety. This is why safe relationships become so healing. A calm nervous system beside yours begins teaching your body something new. Consistent care teaches the body that love does not always disappear after mistakes. Healthy boundaries teach the body that conflict does not automatically equal abandonment. Emotional honesty teaches the body that vulnerability can survive connection. The nervous system slowly relearns life through experience. And perhaps one of the most healing experiences of all is learning that you no longer have to parent yourself through fear. You no longer need to motivate yourself through shame. You no longer need to insult yourself into improvement. You no longer need to carry emotional armor every second of the day. That realization can feel almost unbelievable at first, because many people have spent decades living in emotional survival mode without realizing it. They thought constant tension was normal, constant self-monitoring was normal, constant guilt was normal. But survival mode is not peace, it is endurance. And human beings deserve more than endless endurance. They deserve softness too. This is why healing childhood survival habits is not about becoming someone entirely new. It is about allowing the nervous system to finally experience what it may have lacked earlier: safety, patience, gentleness, emotional consistency, and unconditional worth. Those experiences slowly change the body from the inside out. You stop reacting to yourself with immediate shame. You stop seeing every emotion as a problem. You stop panicking over imperfection. You stop needing to earn love constantly. You begin resting more deeply, breathing more fully, existing more honestly, and slowly the inner world becomes less hostile, not because you suddenly become flawless, but because you finally understand that many of the parts you hated were never trying to ruin your life. They were trying to protect it, even if imperfectly, even if painfully, even if the protection eventually became exhausting. That understanding changes self-criticism into compassion, and compassion is often the beginning of the deepest healing. Because the moment you stop viewing yourself as broken and begin viewing yourself as someone who adapted to survive emotionally, you stop fighting yourself so violently. You begin listening instead. You begin comforting instead of punishing. You begin asking what your nervous system still fears. You begin offering yourself the safety you once searched for everywhere else. And maybe for the first time in a very long while, the younger part of you finally starts realizing something life-changing. The danger is not everywhere anymore. You do not have to keep surviving every moment like you once did. and you no longer have to turn against yourself just to stay safe in the world. And once you begin to understand that many of your harshest patterns were once survival habits, another feeling slowly rises into awareness. A feeling that is difficult to explain because it hides beneath productivity, healing, discipline, ambition, and constant growth. From the outside, your life may look full of movement, but inside there is often a quiet loneliness that comes from never feeling allowed to simply stay as you are. Because when your entire life becomes centered around improving yourself, you slowly stop feeling emotionally known. There is a strange sadness in always feeling like your current self is only a temporary version waiting to become acceptable later. It creates a life where you are constantly reaching forward emotionally, trying to become more healed, more confident, more disciplined, more successful, more self-aware, more emotionally stable. And while growth itself is not wrong, something painful begins happening when self-improvement becomes your primary relationship with yourself. You stop meeting yourself. You start managing yourself. Every emotion becomes something to optimize. Every habit becomes a project. Every weakness becomes evidence that more work is needed. Even moments that should feel human and ordinary become opportunities for self-correction. And slowly, without realizing it, you become emotionally alone inside your own life. Many people who are deeply committed to improving themselves secretly carry enormous loneliness underneath their discipline, not because they are failing at growth, but because they no longer know how to exist without trying to become someone else. This creates a painful internal distance. The current version of you never fully receives love because all your attention is aimed toward the future version. You tell yourself you will finally relax later, finally feel worthy later, finally feel proud later, finally allow softness later, after more healing, after more growth, after more improvement. But later keeps moving, and the present self quietly waits for acceptance that never fully arrives. That waiting becomes heartbreaking over time, because human beings need more than progress. They need connection. They need rest from constant self-evaluation. They need moments where they are not viewed as unfinished projects. But many people do not know how to offer that to themselves anymore. Their mind became a workplace instead of a home. Everything is measured, tracked, analyzed, improved. Even healing becomes lonely when it turns into endless self-monitoring. You begin reading books, listening to advice, journaling, reflecting, changing habits, learning psychology, studying attachment styles, understanding trauma, observing your patterns. And while those things can help deeply, there comes a point where you may realize something painful. You have spent so much time analyzing yourself that you forgot how to simply be with yourself. That creates emotional exhaustion no amount of self-awareness can fully solve. Because self-awareness without self-compassion eventually becomes another form of self-surveillance. You begin watching yourself constantly. Was that reaction healthy? Was that attachment anxiety? Was that emotional maturity? Was that healing or avoidance? Was that insecurity? Was that trauma talking? And while understanding yourself matters, endless analysis can slowly remove you from the actual experience of living. You stop feeling life directly. You start evaluating life constantly. This is one of the loneliest parts of chronic self-improvement. Your mind rarely rests because there is always another layer to work on, another flaw to heal, another trigger to understand, another pattern to correct. And because growth becomes endless, peace keeps getting postponed. Many people secretly believe they are only lovable while improving. As long as they are trying, healing, evolving, and becoming better, they feel emotionally acceptable. But if they stop progressing for a while, shame quickly appears. Rest begins feeling dangerous. Slower seasons feel embarrassing. Emotional setbacks feel humiliating because their identity became attached to growth itself. Not healthy growth, compulsive growth. Growth driven by fear of remaining the same. That fear creates isolation inside the self. You begin feeling disconnected not only from others, but from your own current experience. Even your sadness becomes interrupted by improvement language. Even your pain becomes something you rush to transform into wisdom quickly. You rarely allow yourself to simply struggle honestly without turning it into another lesson or breakthrough. And eventually, the soul becomes tired from always needing to evolve. There are people who genuinely do not remember the last time they felt emotionally relaxed around themselves. Every day feels like another attempt to become emotionally acceptable. Even moments of rest are filled with thoughts about what still needs work. That is not peace. That is emotional labor without end. And what makes this loneliness so strange is that it often exists even when other people admire you. Others may see your discipline, your growth, your intelligence, your self-awareness, your maturity, but inside, you may still feel profoundly unseen because nobody is really meeting the current version of you. Not even you. Everyone is focused on the version you are becoming, including yourself. That creates grief, because the present self quietly disappears underneath all the improvement. The anxious self, the tired self, the confused self, the grieving self, the ordinary self, the deeply human self. All of those parts may quietly feel abandoned while you chase the future version you believe will finally deserve peace. This is why many people feel emotionally disconnected after years of intense self-work. They know how to analyze themselves perfectly, but they do not know how to comfort themselves gently. They understand their wounds intellectually, but they still struggle to feel emotionally safe. They have learned endless strategies for becoming better, but they have forgotten how to simply sit beside themselves without trying to change something immediately. That kind of loneliness is difficult to explain to others, because from the outside, it may look like you are doing everything right. You are growing, healing, learning, improving. But internally, there is still distance between you and yourself. The current version of you still feels emotionally unchosen. This often begins in childhood without people realizing it. Many children learn that love, praise, or safety come through achievement, maturity, usefulness, emotional control, or constant self-improvement. So they grow into adults who unconsciously believe they must continuously evolve in order to deserve connection. The nervous system becomes addicted to self-improvement because improvement feels safer than simply existing. As long as you are progressing, you can avoid the terrifying fear that maybe who you are right now is not enough. That fear sits underneath many people's obsession with growth. Not because growth is wrong, because self-rejection is exhausting, and many people are using growth to escape self-rejection instead of heal it. This is why the loneliness becomes so deep. You are always leaving the current version of yourself behind emotionally. You keep reaching toward another future self while the present self quietly waits for compassion. The body feels that abandonment, it feels the pressure, it feels the endless striving, it feels the constant message saying, "You are not there yet." And eventually, even accomplishments stop feeling satisfying because the nervous system no longer knows how to arrive anywhere emotionally. One breakthrough only creates another goal. One healed pattern reveals another flaw. One success creates another expectation. There is no emotional landing place, only endless becoming that can make life feel strangely hollow even while you are improving externally, because human beings do not only need growth, they need belonging, they need softness, they need spaces where they are not performing transformation constantly, they need moments where they are not measuring themselves. But many people fear stillness because stillness removes the distraction of becoming. Without constant progress, unresolved loneliness rises to the surface. The person suddenly feels the emotional distance they have been outrunning through productivity and healing. This is why some people stay permanently busy with self-work. If they stop, they may finally feel how alone they have been with themselves. That realization can feel devastating at first. You may suddenly notice how rarely you speak to yourself gently, how often your inner voice sounds like a coach, critic, therapist, or evaluator instead of a companion. You may realize you have spent years trying to improve yourself without ever deeply accepting yourself, and acceptance is what creates emotional belonging inside the self. Without acceptance, growth becomes cold, mechanical, transactional. You become someone constantly managing your humanity instead of living it. This affects relationships deeply too. People who are always trying to improve themselves often struggle to feel truly known by others because they keep editing themselves in real time. They present the healing version, the wise version, the improving version, the emotionally aware version, but rarely the unfinished version, rarely the deeply uncertain version, rarely the exhausted version that simply wants to stop trying so hard for a moment. So even in connection, loneliness remains. Because connection without authenticity never fully reaches the nervous system. The body knows when it is still performing. This is why some people feel lonely even in loving relationships. They are loved for the version they present, but the deeper self still feels hidden. They may fear that if they stop appearing emotionally evolved, attractive, productive, or constantly improving, the connection will weaken. So they continue performing progress quietly. But performance is exhausting, and eventually the soul begins craving something deeper. Not admiration, not optimization, not endless growth. Rest. Emotional rest. The kind of rest that comes when you no longer need to constantly become someone else in order to feel worthy of staying connected to yourself. That rest changes everything internally, because for the first time, you begin allowing yourself to exist without turning every flaw into another assignment. You stop asking every difficult emotion how quickly it can become growth. You stop treating yourself like a never-ending self-improvement project. And strangely enough, this is often where real healing deepens, not when you push harder, when you soften enough to stop abandoning yourself during imperfect seasons. Many people are terrified of this softness because they fear it means stagnation. They believe if they stop pressuring themselves constantly, they will stop growing entirely. But growth built only on pressure eventually becomes emotionally unsustainable. The nervous system cannot thrive under endless correction. A person constantly treated like a problem eventually begins feeling emotionally homeless inside themselves. This is why compassion matters so deeply. Compassion reconnects you to your own humanity. It allows you to stop relating to yourself only through goals, fixes, and flaws. It allows the current version of you to finally exist without immediately being compared to some future ideal. That creates relief many people have not felt in years. You wake up and do not immediately scan for what needs improvement. You feel sadness and do not. Instantly turn it into another healing task. You rest without feeling emotionally behind. You have a difficult day without concluding you are failing at growth. You begin existing more honestly, and honesty creates connection, not only with others, with yourself. This is the opposite of the strange loneliness created by compulsive self-improvement. Instead of constantly leaving yourself behind emotionally, you begin staying with yourself more consistently. That changes the inner atmosphere completely. The nervous system relaxes, the mind slows down, the pressure softens. You stop living like someone permanently preparing for a better version of life. You begin living now. This does not mean growth disappears. You still evolve, you still learn, you still heal, but the energy underneath the growth changes completely. You are no longer improving yourself because you secretly hate who you are today. You are caring for yourself because you finally believe the current version deserves care too. That emotional shift removes enormous loneliness from the healing journey, because now the present self is included, not abandoned, not constantly corrected, included the tired self, the fearful self, the hopeful self, the confused self, the healing self, all of it, without needing to earn belonging through endless transformation. This is why many people cry unexpectedly when they finally experience unconditional acceptance. Their nervous system realizes how long they have been carrying the pressure to become more before deserving love. They realize how lonely it felt always trying to improve themselves into worthiness, and once that realization arrives, something important begins happening internally. The chase slows down, not ambition, not healthy growth, the desperate emotional chase to finally become acceptable. That chase begins fading because you no longer need to use constant improvement as proof of value. You begin understanding something deeper. The current version of you was never supposed to be treated like an obstacle standing in the way of love. The current version was the one needing love all along. That realization changes how you breathe, how you rest, how you heal, how you speak to yourself after difficult days, how you exist during unfinished seasons. And maybe, for the first time in a very long while, you begin experiencing something unfamiliar but deeply healing. You begin feeling less alone inside your own life, not because all your flaws disappeared, not because your healing became complete, but because you finally stopped forcing yourself to earn connection with yourself through endless improvement. And in that softer space, the nervous system slowly begins learning a truth it may have never fully trusted before. You are allowed to belong to yourself even before you become everything you hope to be. And once you begin to feel less alone inside your own life, another truth quietly begins revealing itself. The reason acceptance feels so difficult is not because you are weak or incapable of healing. For many people, acceptance feels dangerous because their nervous system was shaped in environments where relaxing emotionally did not feel safe. And when chaos becomes familiar, peace can feel deeply uncomfortable at first. There is a strange fear that appears when someone who has spent years surviving finally tries to soften. Part of them wants rest desperately. They are tired of overthinking, tired of carrying emotional armor, tired of proving themselves constantly, but another part of them becomes afraid the moment they stop fighting, because fighting once kept them safe. This is why acceptance can feel terrifying to people who grew up around emotional unpredictability. To someone whose nervous system was shaped by chaos, tension feels normal. Hypervigilance feels responsible. Worry feels protective. Constant self-monitoring feels necessary. So when life finally offers calmness, the body does not immediately trust it. It waits for something to go wrong. Many people think healing means instantly feeling peaceful once the chaos ends, but the nervous system does not work that way. A body trained in survival often carries survival long after the danger disappears. The mind may consciously want rest, but the body still expects instability. This creates painful inner conflict. You crave peace, yet peace feels unfamiliar. You crave acceptance, yet acceptance feels unsafe. You crave softness, yet softness makes your body tense, not because you enjoy suffering. Because chaos trained your nervous system to associate tension with preparedness, and preparedness once meant survival. A child who grows up around emotional unpredictability learns quickly that relaxing completely can become dangerous. If a parent's mood changes suddenly, the child becomes watchful. If love feels inconsistent, the child becomes alert. If conflict appears unexpectedly, the child learns to anticipate emotional shifts before they happen. The nervous system adapts intelligently. It says, stay ready, stay aware, stay careful, stay emotionally prepared. That adaptation may protect the child in chaotic environments. But later in adulthood, the same survival system can quietly steal peace from everyday life, because now the body no longer knows how to feel safe in calmness. Stillness feels suspicious. Rest feels irresponsible. Acceptance feels like letting your guard down too much. And this becomes especially painful during healing because people often become frustrated with themselves. They say things like, "Why can't I just relax? Why do I feel anxious when things are finally okay? Why does peace make me uncomfortable?" The answer is often heartbreaking in its simplicity. Your nervous system learned that safety depended on staying alert. This is why some people sabotage peaceful moments without understanding why. When life becomes calm, the body begins searching for danger automatically because chaos once felt familiar. The absence of tension can actually trigger anxiety because the nervous system mistakes calmness for vulnerability. For someone raised in emotional unpredictability, hypervigilance becomes identity. They become the one who thinks ahead, the one who anticipates problems, the one who prepares for disappointment, the one who notices every shift in mood, the one who cannot fully relax around uncertainty. And over time, they begin believing this constant tension is simply their personality. But often, it is survival. This is important to understand because many people shame themselves for nervous system responses that once protected them emotionally. They criticize themselves for being anxious, overthinking, emotionally reactive, or unable to trust peace. But the body is not trying to ruin their life. It is trying to prevent old pain from happening again. That changes the conversation entirely. Because now healing is no longer about forcing yourself to calm down. It becomes about helping the nervous system slowly understand that the present is different from the past. And that takes patience. A nervous system trained in chaos does not immediately trust acceptance because acceptance feels too exposed. If you stop scanning for danger, what happens if danger returns? If you stop criticizing yourself, what happens if you become careless? If you stop preparing for rejection, what happens if rejection suddenly appears again? These fears live deep in the body, not always consciously. Sometimes they show up quietly through behavior. You struggle to enjoy good moments fully because you expect them to disappear. You feel guilty during rest because your body equates stillness with vulnerability. You stay emotionally guarded even with kind people. You over-prepare for conversations. You replay mistakes constantly. You feel uneasy when life becomes too calm. All of these responses make emotional sense when seen through the lens of survival. A nervous system shaped by chaos often believes that constant tension prevents future pain. So letting go of tension feels risky. Acceptance feels like lowering defenses. Peace feels temporary. Trust feels dangerous. This is why many people unconsciously recreate emotional chaos in adulthood, not because they want suffering, but because the nervous system feels more familiar inside intensity than calmness. Calmness feels uncertain. Chaos feels recognizable. A healthy relationship may feel emotionally confusing because there is less unpredictability to track. A peaceful day may create restlessness because the body is waiting for disruption. Even kindness can feel suspicious because the nervous system expects hidden conditions. This creates deep emotional exhaustion. The person becomes trapped between craving peace and fearing it at the same time. That tension affects every area of life. Relationships become difficult because vulnerability feels unsafe. Rest becomes difficult because stillness activates anxiety. Self-acceptance becomes difficult because criticism once felt protective. Joy becomes difficult because the body expects loss. And perhaps most painfully, the person begins distrusting their own softness. They believe if they stop pushing themselves constantly, everything will fall apart. This belief often develops in childhood environments where emotional safety depended on staying alert. Maybe the child became the emotional caretaker in the family. Maybe they had to predict moods to avoid conflict. Maybe they learned to stay hyper-aware because unpredictability carried emotional consequences. So now, as adults, they carry enormous tension inside the nervous system without realizing how much energy it consumes. The body never fully rests. Even sleep may not feel restorative because internally the nervous system remains partially activated, always preparing, always monitoring, always bracing. This is why acceptance can initially feel terrifying instead of comforting. Acceptance asks the nervous system to stop fighting temporarily. It asks the body to unclench. It asks the mind to stop scanning for flaws constantly. But for a survival-based nervous system, unclenching feels exposed. The body wonders, what if something bad happens while I am relaxed? That question lives underneath many people's inability to feel safe, not intellectually, physically. The body itself remembers chaos, and the body remembers longer than the conscious mind sometimes does. This is why people can understand logically that they are safe while still feeling deeply unsafe emotionally. Their nervous system has not fully updated yet. The old emotional map still exists underneath the current reality. That map shapes reactions automatically. A delayed text creates panic. A slight tone shift creates fear. A mistake creates shame. An uncertain situation creates catastrophic thinking, not because the person is irrational, because their nervous system learned early that small emotional signals could predict larger emotional danger. This is why healing cannot happen through logic alone. You cannot simply convince a survival nervous system to relax overnight. The body must experience safety repeatedly before it begins trusting calmness. That process can feel painfully slow, especially for people who are used to measuring healing through visible progress. They become frustrated when old fears still appear. They criticize themselves for not feeling peaceful yet. But nervous system healing is not linear. The body learns through repetition, consistency, gentleness, safe experiences, and perhaps most importantly, through not being shamed for surviving the way it learned to survive. Many people who grew up in chaos became emotionally strong in ways others admire. They became independent, responsible, hyper-aware, mature, reliable, resilient. But underneath those strengths is often a person who never fully learned how to rest emotionally. Their body became organized around protection instead of peace. So even after leaving chaotic environments, they continue carrying chaos internally through tension, overthinking, perfectionism, self-criticism, emotional suppression, or hypervigilance. This is why some people feel deeply uncomfortable when life finally becomes stable. Stability removes distraction. It removes the constant adrenaline of survival. And suddenly, emotions that were buried underneath years of coping begin rising slowly to the surface. Grief appears, loneliness appears, exhaustion appears, fear appears. The person may become confused because they thought calmness would immediately feel healing. Instead, calmness sometimes creates space for long-suppressed emotions to finally emerge. That can feel overwhelming, but it is often part of healing. The body is finally safe enough to stop surviving constantly, so hidden emotions begin asking to be felt. This is why acceptance becomes such an important part of recovery from chaos. Acceptance teaches the nervous system that not every emotion requires emergency action. Not every fear requires immediate fixing. Not every uncomfortable feeling signals danger. Acceptance says, you are allowed to breathe here. You do not need to prepare for disaster every second. You do not need to earn safety through tension. But learning this can feel emotionally terrifying at first, because tension once created the illusion of control. The person believes that if they stay vigilant enough, maybe they can prevent future pain. Yet, hypervigilance never truly creates peace. It only creates exhaustion. No nervous system can remain permanently alert without eventually becoming overwhelmed. This is why so many people who grew up in chaos secretly feel tired all the time, not physically lazy. emotionally overactivated. Their body has spent years carrying invisible tension without enough opportunities to fully relax. That tension becomes so normal they stop noticing it. Tight shoulders, clenched jaw, racing thoughts, difficulty resting, difficulty trusting, difficulty slowing down, difficulty believing good things will last. All signs of a nervous system still expecting instability. And underneath all of it is often a very scared younger part still asking, "Am I safe yet?" That question deserves compassion, not shame. Because many adults are still trying to create the emotional safety they lacked earlier in life. Some try to create it through control, others through perfectionism, others through achievement, others through emotional independence. But true safety cannot be built entirely through external control. Eventually, safety must also be felt internally. That is where acceptance becomes life-changing. Not passive acceptance, not giving up, but acceptance of the present moment without immediately treating it like a threat. Acceptance of your humanity without constant correction. Acceptance of rest without guilt. Acceptance of calmness without expecting punishment afterward. These experiences slowly teach the nervous system something new. Peace is not danger. Softness is not weakness. Stillness is not failure. You do not need to stay emotionally armed every moment to survive life. That lesson takes time to trust fully, especially for people whose bodies spent years equating relaxation with vulnerability. This is why healing often feels uncomfortable before it feels peaceful. The nervous system is learning a completely different way of existing. It is moving from survival towards safety, and safety can initially feel unfamiliar. Some people even miss the emotional intensity of chaos without understanding why. Not because chaos was healthy, but because intensity felt normal. The nervous system became accustomed to emotional highs and lows. Calmness may feel empty at first because the body is still addicted to adrenaline. This can create guilt and confusion. The person may think, "Why do I feel uncomfortable when things are finally peaceful?" Again, the answer is often simple. Your body learned chaos before it learned calmness. That learning does not disappear overnight. But slowly, through repeated experiences of safety, the nervous system begins softening. You stop expecting every good moment to collapse. You stop panicking during stillness. You stop needing constant tension to feel prepared. You begin trusting peaceful experiences more fully. And perhaps most importantly, you stop treating yourself like a problem that must remain under constant surveillance. That shift changes everything internally, because now the body begins experiencing what it may have lacked for years: permission to unclench, permission to rest emotionally, permission to stop bracing constantly, permission to exist without preparing for emotional disaster every moment. That permission can feel deeply emotional, because many people realize how long they have lived in survival mode without fully understanding it. They thought they were simply anxious, simply intense, simply perfectionistic, simply overthinkers. But underneath those labels was often a nervous system shaped by unpredictability. And once you understand that, compassion naturally begins replacing shame. You stop asking, "Why am I like this?" You begin asking, "What did my nervous system survive that made these reactions feel necessary?" That question softens the inner world, because now you are no longer fighting yourself constantly. You are listening, understanding, reassuring, reparenting. And slowly, the body begins learning a new emotional reality. You do not have to stay in survival mode forever. You do not have to remain emotionally guarded every second. You do not have to earn peace through hypervigilance. You do not have to keep carrying chaos inside your body long after the chaos itself has ended. That realization changes the relationship with acceptance completely. Acceptance no longer feels like danger. It begins feeling like relief. Not instant relief, gradual relief. The kind that arrives slowly as the nervous system realizes it no longer has to fight for safety every waking moment. The kind that teaches the body how to breathe deeply again. The kind that reminds the heart it no longer has to prepare constantly for emotional collapse. The kind that allows softness to stop feeling threatening. And maybe that is one of the deepest forms of healing a person can experience. Not becoming perfect, not eliminating fear completely, but finally teaching a nervous system shaped by chaos that peace is not something it has to fear anymore. Maybe deep healing was never about becoming a perfect person. Maybe it was about finally putting down the pressure to constantly repair yourself. Through all these lessons, one truth kept returning again and again. You are not a machine that needs endless fixing. You are a human being carrying pain, survival habits, fears, emotions, and unfinished parts that deserve understanding instead of punishment. For so long, you may have treated every flaw like proof you were failing. You may have believed peace would only come after enough improvement, enough healing, enough achievement, enough emotional control. But real healing begins the moment you stop turning against yourself every time you struggle. It begins when you stop treating your emotions like enemies. It begins when you realize your worth was never supposed to depend on how perfectly you perform, heal, grow, or survive. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a long time, you can let yourself breathe without trying to become someone else first. Before you leave, I want you to do something honest. In the comments, write the one thing you are tired of trying to fix about yourself, just one. You may be surprised how many people have been carrying the exact same weight in silence. And if this video helped you feel even a little less alone inside your own mind, subscribe to the channel. There are still so many conversations waiting for the part of you that is finally ready to stop fighting itself.